All right, so we're going to get started here. Welcome, everybody, to the first of our virtual Agoyo conferences. My name is Michelle Cardos. I am the Director of Education for the American Guild of Organists. It is so wonderful to have you all here today. We'll be hearing from a lot of different amazing presenters. You should have received the conference schedule along with the conference booklet. In the booklet, you'll be able to see abstracts of the different presentations that will be going on, as well as bios for each of our wonderful presenters. Before we do that, just a couple quick announcements here. This is a bit of a free form meeting space, so you can come and go as what works best for your schedule. Just give us a moment sometimes because we'll wait different moments to just admit you in and out if that does happen to be the case. Feel free to use the chat throughout the entire conference. We'll be able to ask questions through there, communicate with each other. There'll also be opportunities at the end of each presentation to ask some different questions. So when that time comes, I'll invite you to use the raise hand tool on Zoom and we'll get your questions answered that way. We will try to stick as closely as we can to the schedule. So if we don't get to your question, just know that there'll be an opportunity afterwards to kind of submit those and we can connect you so we can get some of those answers for you. So don't feel that any of your questions are going to go unanswered. We have here with us our wonderful committee on Young Organists who is sponsoring this conference. We have Nicholas Stegall, who is our counselor for Young Organists. We have Laura Bate, Bridget Devaney, Ethan Dropper, Daniel Gauger, Connor Larson, and Katrina Lau. So many thanks to them for being willing to put this all together and to be able to have this first event. I also want to thank our wonderful sponsor, Hopwork, who graciously helped fund some of this conference for our speakers to come, which you will see throughout. And you will also get to hear two presentations from them, which I'm really excited about. It's a really cool opportunity to see how the system works. And before we get started here, I want to hand it over to James Tomashar, our wonderful executive director of the AGO, to give you all a welcome as well.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. Wonderful to be with all of you, and thank you all for attending this first annual Agoyo Live conference in 2025. This is Michelle's brainchild, and it's wonderful to see so many people participating for this first time conference. So welcome, everybody. Great to have you all with us. Caitlin, wonderful to see you. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. And as we go through this conference, I'll be reminding you of some other upcoming Agoyo events. If you don't have it on your calendar, please go ahead and register for one of the two conferences happening this summer, either in Fort Worth or in Phoenix. There'll be an opportunity for an Agoyo reception, so you'll be able to network and meet each other through that. We also have 4 different POEs that'll be happening this summer. So please check those out. One is also a POE-A for those that might be more advanced and want to apply to something like that. We also have some different membership discounts. So if you are an AGO member or thinking about becoming an AGO member, please check that out on our page because you can get some really great discounts for some different things that may help you wherever you're at in school, in life, just in general as a musician. Also, we have a lot of different scholarship and competition opportunities. So I really encourage you to look those up, see what you might find about those. They're a really good chance to kind of, number one, put your skills out there for a test, especially for the competitions. But also, I know a lot of people come away from those with networking, people that they meet through them, teachers, other organists, other people in the AGO. So I'll remind you of these different events throughout this, so I just encourage you to go and check that out. There's lots of good stuff happening throughout the year here at the AGO. Again, feel free to use the chat throughout the entire session. And if it's all right with you, Caitlin, I think we'll get started with your presentation. So our first presenter here is a wonderful person, and of course, organist, Caitlin Emerson, who's going to talk with us all about a life as an international organist. So go ahead and take it away, Caitlin.
Sure. It's unusual to start these things early. My goodness, Michelle, very well organized. It's really lovely to be here with all of you. I'm speaking a bit remotely. It's 10 p.m. I'm here in the UK actually, so forgive me if I sound late evening at any point. It's amazing to be able to do this from so far away, and also to be uh, able to chat with so many people around the country. So please feel free to ask questions as I go on a bit about my experiences in the different kinds of studying that I've done, and also the things that I've advised students on, because I've done quite a bit of advising with students looking at scholarships and different study abroad programs and trying to figure out the best fit for them. So I'm really happy to answer any questions that you have, and also to chat with you about options that you might be considering, because it's a pretty wide world out there. There's lots of opportunity, and I'd love you to really make the most of any of it. So I've put together a little slideshow, if you don't mind. So I'm going to request to share my screen, if that's all right. Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to stop the other screens, the other computer sound share, if that's all right. Great, cool. All right, so let's see if this will do a thing. Can you all see my slideshow? Perfect. So yeah, you're going to see lots of organ photos, I promise. And you're also going to see a lot of information. So I'm going to throw a lot at you and we'll see what sticks. Feel free to screenshot anything that looks interesting, but I'm also happy to share any of these slides as a PDF. There's a couple of lists of things like competitions, scholarships, different schools around the world that have study programs. I really want to just put all of this at your fingertips, but it is only scratching the surface. So really don't hesitate to do some of your own exploration or ask questions, and somebody will know the answer eventually. So first I want to kind of do a little bit of chatting of life as a working organist. I'm really fortunate at the moment. The majority of my living comes from teaching and from playing concerts. So I do also have experience as a church organist, but I'm going to speak primarily about the act of being self-employed, primarily as a concert organist or as a teacher, and a few of the skills that you might need for that. So essentially, as a concert organist or a private teacher, you're a small business owner, which means you're your own business administrator. At some point, some of us may have secretaries, and if and when you reach that point, then I am very jealous. Um, that means we do some financial management. So we have to keep track of the money that's coming in, the money that's coming out, any expenses that we have, what pots those expenses are coming into, if it's travel, if it's hotel, if it's food. Just keeping an eye to make sure that we're ideally making money, and then figuring out where we can maybe spend a little money in order to make money, which often is the first step in kind of doing more things outside the US, but we'll get to that a little bit more later. So this is incomes, receipts, mileage tracking, things like that. Just a couple of little things. There's a free app called Expensify, which you can photograph receipts for, and it will automatically extract the totals of those receipts and the date on the receipt and also the vendor. So that's a really easy way to track your receipts. You can also input your income from that. There's also some really good mileage apps. I think the one I use is called Stride. Again, free. So you just input your miles and you can automatically export those later. So super easy things to do. Contracts are always really good to know about, either with students. I have a lot of colleagues who do contracts with students. So they ask, for example, parents to pay ahead each month so that you actually have some reliable income. And that allows you to set boundaries, such as you can only cancel up to 24 hours in advance, or else you have a financial penalty. Some kind of warning of if they're going to stop lessons, things like that. It's not meant to penalize either side, but it's meant to protect you. With concerts, of course, you can have things such as what your fee is, how many nights hotel or homestay that you really need in order to be at your best. They can notify you of any social obligations, any other expenses that you might have out of pocket that they wouldn't cover, publicity materials, who's going to take care of that. There's lots of different things that you could have. I have a couple of colleagues who have things like they need peanuts in their in whatever green room they have, or they really want a particular kind of pillow. I've never quite gotten to that stage. It seems like something I don't need. But I very much admire those who can do that. The other thing you need to be aware of is taxes. Now, all of this financial management allows you to have everything together for if you have an accountant that you're going to send your taxes off to, or to do them yourself. So income, of course, you'll have to list that. You'd have to list any expenses that you have so you can write those off. You can list mileage. There's some really helpful different websites to do your taxes and to make sure that everything is kosher before you send that all in and hopefully get money back or not. When you're self-employed, as opposed to when you're salaried, of course, no money gets automatically taken out of your income. So typically, once you reach a certain threshold, what you would pay is what we call quarterlies. So for example, complete example out of the blue, if you were making 50,000 a year, then you would figure out in advance approximately how much tax you would owe and divide that into quarters. And then you would pay whether it was $700 or $1,000 once every quarter. So you pay one check in January, one check in March, April, one in June, and then one in September. So you just kind of rotate throughout the year. And then it's not quite as painful when tax day comes around. So you're not paying it in a chunk. So quarterlies are a really important thing to do. You're also your own travel agent typically. So that means you spend lots of time on Orbitz and Expedia and then going directly to the airlines to book, which is always a really good thing to do. You're figuring out hotels unless they're booking them for you. You're sorting train travel, renting cars if you're doing that, just essentially getting you where you need to go. A lot of that travel agenting I found ends up being debating with airlines and with hotel people, which is rather fun. I enjoy those sorts of things, and it creates some really good stories. There was some crazy storm going on in Florida. This was not the most recent one, but I was teaching a POE several years ago, and I was trying to get out and get to the Rochester OHS. This must have been 2018 then. And I had to debate with a airline person that no, I could get to Syracuse, I could get to Buffalo, any of these cities around there. So we had to be a little bit creative to get me where I needed to go safely, and within their strictures. But it took a little negotiation. So if you find that fun, that's always really useful. You also kind of have to be your own techie. So you'll do some kind of publicity management, whether this is writing CVs and bios. We all probably do that to some extent already. And just kind of making sure that you sound the way that you want to in the public forum. Not always the most comfortable thing, because most of us spend a lot of hours in a practice room, not shouting from the rooftops about how amazing we are. I'm not sure I've ever gotten comfortable doing that, and I'm happy to have other people do it. If anybody wants to volunteer and prevent me from having to talk about myself, I would be very grateful. You also want to be thinking about, again, visually how you're presented online, what kinds of photos, publicity photos you have, what style, if you want to be very elegant, if you want to be fun, if you want to be kind of a person who's full of awe and wonder, you can kind of have a sort of brand or not. All of these descriptions of kind of the online persona has to be you in the end. Taking on a persona is possible, but it's really challenging because if you're taking on a persona, it might not seem as genuine. So one wants to be careful and to really see what comes to you really naturally for that kind of online persona. Social media, of course, seems inevitable these days. I know people who don't need to do anything with it. So if that's you, kudos to you. That's fantastic. But if you're into social media, there are lots of great ways to do it. Just be genuine. Most people can sniff out when somebody is trying to do something they're not quite comfortable doing. So if you're uncomfortable doing, don't. And you're also your own creator and producer. You get to come up with the ideas. You get to sit there while the recorder is running and decide if it's good enough. And you get to find really neat ways to show music to other people. And don't hesitate to use those skills. Every single bit of that is not only useful to you, it's important for all of us. So we, of course, also can't forget to be excellent musicians. We kind of need all of these pieces, and that takes a lot of time. The snippets on Instagram take a lot less time than the practice that gets you there. We all know this. It just takes a huge amount of investment. It takes curiosity, it takes time, and it takes enjoying the process as much as you possibly can, even through the hard bits. And then one of the other interesting and challenging parts of all of this small business thing is that we deal with people. When we're in a concert, even if we're the one on stage, we're still looking at people when we speak to them, we're still bowing, we're still communicating with them after the concert. And then we also communicate with them online through email as well as through social media. Being someone who has a system for getting through your inbox, and the inboxes are getting fuller and fuller every year, it seems. If you are that person who is reliable, that will stand you in exceedingly good stead and make you really valuable to everybody around you. This can, I mean, being consistent about it can really be answering emails twice a week if that's when you want to do that. I find like picking a particular time of day really helps me to make sure I'm not refreshing my inbox all the time, which is a personal problem. But also, or you could do, you know, twice a day, so 9 a.m. and 4 p.m., just checking to see what's come in. But just having a system means that it's not random and that you can be relied upon to respond when a gig comes up. Or you can be relied upon to respond when somebody needs a CV or some kind of photos or something like that. So it will make you not only a better musician, a better business owner, but also a better concert host when you are on that side of things too. So don't hesitate to be a really good administrator, and don't hesitate to be curious about the people around you. We, as much as it can sometimes feel as though we're playing into a void because we don't see the people we're playing to, or we're practicing on our own, in the end, I think most of us do it because we want to have some kind of communication with people. So don't forget that we also need to learn about them. That's a massive part of being national or being international. So here are a couple of photos of the fact that people do turn up to things. So the one on the left is a wonderful academy up in Scotland where we had a Baroque violinist doing a lecture on how the Baroque violin could be used to inform organ playing. The one in the middle is in Limoges, France, where I was doing a duet concert with a trombonist, which was such fun. And the one on the right is the auditorium in Madrid with a piano concerto, which is quite stellar. So we want people to be in these wonderful situations. So we kind of have to be people. So this is kind of the structure of where I'm going to go in this talk. So we're going to start with the idea of preparing to be international. I would argue that in order to be national probably needs similar tools to being international. So I'll leave it up to you to decide based on my argument. And then after that, we'll talk about different ways to go international, to make those international connections through study tours, through competitions, and through studying living abroad. And then some practicalities about not being in the US, living abroad. And then finally, I'll talk about performing abroad, kind of the international concert organist thing. If you're not based abroad, or you're kind of, or you're based in a couple of places, and then you're traveling for individual gigs, whether through as a series of concerts in a tour, or as just kind of one-offs, because that's just how the schedules work out. So first of all, preparing to be international. So what sorts of things help you to be international? Well, the first thing, of course, is going to be languages. So English, of course, is an extremely useful language. We are so lucky to have that as our native tongue. English, we can already get around quite a bit. We'll already be able to do, to communicate, particularly in, of course, England, Australia, all of the English-speaking countries, but also Germany, the Netherlands, quite a bit in France, through a lot of Eastern and Western Europe, and through parts of Asia. But it's important to have a little bit of other languages. Ones I speak are German and French. I speak a little bit of Russian as well, a little bit of Japanese. Frankly, if you can say hello and communicate just a little bit with people, you will find a massive amount of respect and of actually, frankly, just joy. When people see you trying just a little bit to speak their language, that kind of cements a relationship between you immediately. Curiosity and openness goes along with this. The idea of not just going to a place because you want the money. I know none of us want to do that. But going there to experience the people, to chat with them, to play the new organ, and to see a little bit of the city, even if you have the weirdest amount of practice time where perhaps you're practicing from midnight until 9 a.m. So you end up having 3 hours in the afternoon when you're awake that you can actually go see things. If you've got the energy to do that, you will grow from the experience. And that's also the most important thing. um, it allows us to make those connections and frankly to be invited back. I always say that the concerts I'm most happy about are the ones where somebody wants to hear me again because I know that instrument a little bit better and because I know those people just a little bit better. So we can kind of ferment form a relationship that continues and is based on those connections. So let's talk a little bit about study tours. I hope some of you have heard of these before. They often happen through different groups or universities. So, for example, I think Baylor just went on a study tour to Germany or France. And I'm currently planning a study tour to Paris, actually, at the end of March. So these will be when maybe faculty members, or for example, Micah Broen at Pipe Dreams, will take you off for a weekend, a week, 2 weeks, and you'll just go see instruments. So, and typically as a result, you'll also meet the organists. So groups for these can vary in size. Some of them can be really small, maybe 3 to 5 people. I did one for 2 weeks in France, which was just 5 of us. That was at the end of my freshman year of undergrad. And that was absolutely life-changing. It was the first time I had left the country on my own, and first time I had been to France, and it was absolutely extraordinary. Some of them will have upwards of 30 people. And of course, the size will influence how much time you have on the instruments, and also kind of what social connections you make, because of course, one trip, 30 people, you're going to have a lot more social networking going on as a result of that. There will also be different intensity levels. So one that's a bit more on the social level in the sense of people who are not necessarily players. You might have more playing time. There might be a little bit less pressure. Whereas a university one, that's a conservatory group, perhaps this might be a little bit more pressure to play as well as you can, although there's always pressure, I suppose, to play as well as you can. There might be a high level of playing, and you might perhaps have more master classes with some experts. So look around if you're interested in a study tour. There's several going on. I couldn't find any particular ones for this summer, but I must admit I only spent about 20 minutes looking. So I'm sure there are some going on. Competitions are also a really great way to start to make international connections. So this is a photo from the Tarverdiev competition in Russia, which is much more difficult to do these days, of course. So benefits of doing competitions, often the travel is subsidized. So you might get, for example, I had a free trip to Japan when I did the Musashino competition. So obviously huge. You get to go to a foreign country where they've likely paid for your hotel, at least help with travel, might give you a per diem. So keep an eye on what some of the benefits are for these different competitions. You get to go to a place that you probably would never, I wouldn't have ever been able to go otherwise. It, extraordinary opportunities. Go for the instruments. They're fascinating. You can go play shukas like this in Germany as well as Russia. You can, go to Harlem and play that immense, fabulous instrument just through a competition, which is much easier than phoning up the organist if you don't necessarily have the connections to do that. So you will also get fabulous networking opportunities, obviously with a jury, of course, but actually the more important one, equally important one, is with your peers. I have made such strong connections through competitions, even though we're competing against each other. In a way, we're just competing to be the best versions of ourselves. In the end, whatever the jury picks is more up to luck than anything else. Maybe luck in what they had for lunch and how they slept last night, but it really is more up to luck. Once you're there for the competition, you're all of an incredible level. So the more friends you make at a competition, the likelier you are to have a much better outcome and to play better, frankly. Because if I might give the Russia example, I was there. They run 3 first rounds. They now run 4, but when I was doing it, it was 3 first rounds. There was one in Moscow, there was one in Hamburg, and there was one in Kansas, the University of Kansas. And 4 Americans went from that. And we created kind of a little American team. So when we discovered that the stop pullers could not speak English and could not read music, we ended up pulling stops for each other in the competition. And I think that's why I think 3 out of the 4 of us placed. So become a team. Sometimes there's one person who's really competitive. Don't let them sully it for all of you. Really network with everybody around you. Um, The limitations, of course, of competition, they can be expensive. Travel is not always subsidized, so do be aware of the potential costs of having to go. They're obviously very stressful. You want to play your best. You want to impress your teacher. You want to impress the jury. You'd like to win. Just moderate yourself as much as you possibly can. Learn about how to mitigate stress. Learn how to reframe the experience as much as possible, and learn how to care for yourself. It can also be disappointing. Whether or not you rationalize the fact that it is a lot of luck once you get to the end, it is really frustrating not to get something, especially when you've played really well, or when you find out that various things were happening behind the scenes that made it not quite as fair as you wished it were. Unfortunately, it's part of the reality of being in this wonderful world full of humans who, as extraordinary as they are still human. So I hate to say it's all part of the experience, but while saying that, I can also say that you can become part of the solution in making it better. So when you're sitting on the other side of the table, you can help to make things more fair and to make these things more inclusive. Competitions, feel free to take a nice screenshot of this if you're interested. All of the numbers give you the age ranges. So it's great. We've got the competition in France, Béthune Saint-Omer. It seems that that is now age limitless, so you won't be cut off at any point. Most of these age ranges are in your 30s. The Northern Ireland one and the IAO RCO are really pointing towards some of the earlier career organists, so those are great ones. So those are some options if you want to travel. And then we've got a couple more in some more unusual countries, arguably unusual, but and I've tried to put the dates when those should next happen, triple checked them obviously, because sometimes funding is funny or something happens, so they postpone it or competitions do get canceled. So thinking of a little studying and living abroad, so going a little bit more long term first. So we'll talk about shorter term study abroad. We've got loads of academies. Of course, we all know about the AGOs, but we're going to focus a little bit on the international ones. So we've got the Royal Canadian College of Organists. I actually taught at this one last year. So that one prides itself on lots of private lessons. So you would end up going around Toronto. I think it always happens in Toronto. And you would have private lessons. I think Isabel Demers has taught at that several times. I taught at that. Sarah Svensson typically runs it. You'll get a nice group of experienced teachers. You'll have some master classes, some concerts, and essentially go around Toronto and take lessons on different instruments, which is quite fun. International Organ Festival Haarlem, you see that one's fairly long. There's lots of a variety of events with that one. Germany, we've got several different ones, kind of depending on what your focus might be. Italy's Samarano is really, really famous. Also wonderful to look into. The Royal College of Organists has two main organ weeks, and we'll talk a little bit further about what these are for a little bit later. The organ student experience typically takes place in Oxford, although not always. So if you're interested in traveling over to the UK and doing anything with Oxbridge, Cambridge and Oxford, and kind of want to dip your toe in the water of heading over there, it's always a good thing to do. The RCO also has a normal summer course that they run that takes place in London. Oundle, of course, takes place in London, or it takes place in Oundle, and that's another one. And then St. Andrews Organ Week is up at St. Andrews University, and that one also features private lessons. So you get private lessons with the teachers every day, and then in the afternoon, they'll have lectures, lecture recitals, master classes, things like that. And typically, they have a really interesting focus on something. So, for example, I think this summer it's on the connection between American and British organ building. In the past, they've done Italian organs and Italian playing, and they'll always, I think last summer, Martin Schmading had carte blanche. So they'll always have some kind of focus. So keep an eye on that to see if it's something up your alley. France has a massive amount of summer academies, so do keep an eye on these different websites. I'm happy to send those in a more friendly format. But they'll have, I just saw Jean-Baptiste Monod at Rouen just announced his summer academy. So you can go and play phenomenal instruments for just a few days, a week, or 2 weeks if you want to explore those. thinking a little bit longer term, if any of you are interested in looking in the UK, I just did a little section on that. So we've got cathedral organ scholarships, which are typically some kind of gap year. In England, it's usually a gap year right before people go to university. Often for Americans, it tends to be a little bit more successful if you do it after university, simply because you didn't grow up within the system and you can get a little bit more playing experience before. But people have been successful doing it earlier. So don't hold off if you're really keen. So what these do is they give you a ton of hands-on experience. It's essentially a job. You would live in the choir school. You would be working with choristers, you'd be playing accompaniments, you'd be playing for services, you'd potentially be hosting visiting organists. It's quite an intense job that's meant to be for an early career organist. You'd be playing on-the-job coachings with the directors of music and the assistants, if there are any. You'd be doing some chorister teaching. Sometimes you might be doing conducting, although typically, if you're the third in the rungs of the ladder, perhaps not. The assistant might conduct while you play. Can give you some excellent connections through that director of music and any of their assistants. Through the singers, because usually at least the back row, the tenors and basses, are professional singers. So they'll be able to connect you if you want to do any accompanying of singing or want to be connected with any other churches. Also, if they're visiting recitalists, I was just speaking with somebody who is organ scholar, I think at Salisbury, and he was listing off the incredible amount of people that he got to meet and host and talk to and learn from while he was there for just 1 year. In order to do this, of course, you have to hone particular skills. So the RCO's, the organ student experience, is made for this. Essentially, it's kind of made so that you can pass the RCO's exams, which are the equivalent of the AGO exams. But those RCO exams are typically kind of honed for that cathedral organ scholar school. Oundle is another option for that. So speaking of the RCO exams, some skills to explore both for the exams and also for organ scholarships would be sight reading and open score reading. So for example, typically I think it's some kind of Palestrina that you just want to read. Hymn playing and some figured bass, some basic improvisation, so talking hymn introductions, different kinds of reharmonizations, transitions, fanfares, extemporizing on hymns, expanding them, in case the offertory is a little bit too short and you just need something to cover movement, or while they wash the dishes after communion. It's always a good thing to be able to extend out various things. They'll also, of course, test your accompanying, your sight transposition, and your repertoire playing. It's also really important, actually, to know, if you're really interested in this, and I'm happy to talk further, I won't get too off the beaten path, but to know how these organs work, because in every country, the organs function a little bit differently. I find that in the US, we tend to use generals and maybe not so many divisionals, whereas in the UK, a memory level, if there are more than one, will only have maybe 8 to 12 generals, and they'll be at the top, above the swell manual, which makes them really inconvenient for generally hitting. But the point is that you're meant to hit a general and maybe not hit another general for several more pages, and instead you're playing using the divisionals primarily, and the divisionals are set up in a crescendo. So which is quite nice, actually, because they typically keep their divisionals set in that order. So anytime you sit down in an unfamiliar instrument, you can actually play a repertoire because you know roughly what those divisionals are going to do. It's actually quite liberating, unless you really want to go back and select precisely which stops you're going to play. It's primarily liberating when you have 5 minutes to put together the accompaniment for the evensong that's looming over your shoulder. So it's really a useful tool, and very happy to talk about those things. Also, really important to work on your oral skills. You would be working with choristers and reacting to what they're doing and giving them feedback on their singing. So it's really important for you to be able to kind of tie together the intellect and what you're hearing around you. So that would be tested as well. A couple other things to know. They typically appoint quite early, so October, November for September. So that would even be before any university applications are due, which is really useful. So if you were interested in doing that, keep an eye quite early. You really want to make sure your CV and your cover letter are bespoke for that job. There will be a lot of information about that job available, so you'll be able to do that. It's great if you can go to England to interview in person, but it can be possible online. Of course, these days it's getting easier and easier to do that. To play in the audition, it would typically be a Bach piece and a contrasting piece. You do that transitionary improvisation that I talked about, and you would be working on hymns, transposition and extemporization, and a little sight reading and open score reading. So they'd kind of check on everything. Probably also some kind of accompaniment, just to see if you can follow a conductor, although if you can do all of these other things, presumably you'd be just fine. If you want to find out more, keep an eye on RSCM UK, Cathedral Music Trust, and Church Times. Look at cathedral websites. There's lots of stuff online, and ask people who have done them. One person actually, the reason why this is also forefront of my mind is that I was just seeing Kata Kaufman, who was organ scholar at Truro Cathedral in Peterborough. She's American. And I chatted with her about this, and she said, if you do find yourself appointed, it will be a life-changing experience in the best way. There's really nothing like being immersed in the cathedral routine. So if you are interested in that, please feel free to chat with me about it. I'm happy to send you her or somebody else's contact details. But let's talk about institution-affiliated study abroad. So this could be, of course, at either the undergraduate or the postgraduate level. Typically, people tend to do it for the postgraduate level simply because, frankly, it's easier. You're not having to prepare the applications while still in high school. Typically, universities, undergraduate universities, are going to be very well stocked with people who can advise you on those applications, both for the institutions and also for grants to support them. And also because in the US, we very much value the liberal arts degree or the US conservatory degree. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is what is kind of your long-term plan? What do you plan to do after the study abroad? And will whatever degree you're looking at qualify you for whatever you're looking to do after the study abroad? So some general points. Internationally, you're going to find that courses really vary in length. So bachelor's degrees can be 3 or 4 years. So of course, we're very used to the 4-year bachelor model. In the UK, pretty much all bachelor's degrees are just 3 years. It's really quick, blink of an eye, and you're done. Master's degrees can also vary. You can do a 1-year or a 2-year master's degree. So depending on where you're looking, make sure you know kind of the duration that you're looking at funding, as well as the duration you're looking at being out of the country. Things like the artist diploma, which is roughly equivalent to in France, the perfectionnement, to perfect yourself degree, and the concert exam in Germany also vary in length. And those kind of don't have to take the place of a bachelor, a master, a doctorate. They're really going to give you the opportunity to sink your teeth into repertoire, to work with a particular teacher, to travel and to experience instruments, or to work on a particular style that you're really wanting to get into. Of course, in contrast with the US, really not any general education courses. Most people internationally actually specialize around the age of 16 or 17. Essentially at the SAT level, the ACT level, they're taking exams specifically, well, exams that would be more equivalent to AP level exams than our SAT or ACT. So and they might only take 3 to 5 of those. So they're really focusing in on their topic. So there's just not really that emphasis on the liberal arts degrees over here. I won't get into the debates over, whether that's good or bad. It certainly has its upsides and it certainly has its challenges. And I think there are benefits to both systems, but this is not about my personal opinions. The grades and the marking systems will vary. So our GPA system rather falls out of popularity quite immediately, and you find that everybody around you is talking about something that you absolutely do not understand. So, for example, in Germany, in the conservatoire systems, you're ranked on a point scale where a 1.0 is the top and a 2.0 is lower. So that gets confusing very quickly. In England, it's also on the percentage scale like in the US, but whereas, most people might be capable of getting an 85, 90, 95, 100, in the UK, a 70 is an excellent grade, which can be a bit of a shock if you're not quite prepared for it. So just be aware that the systems may vary and you might need to adjust your expectations. The deadlines for applications can vary hugely, from the December deadlines that we're used to in the US all the way to June. When I applied in Stuttgart, they told me that if I got the DAAD scholarship to study there, that I wouldn't have to apply until September. when I arrived, hoping to be accepted, which was a terrifying thing. And in retrospect, I would have rather come in June to audition, because auditioning that late meant I wasn't eligible for different kinds of German study through the conservatory. So, retrospect, um, you can't know these things in advance unless you happen to stumble upon the right information. It's just how it goes. The cost, of course, will be massively contingent upon where you want to go. In the UK, at the moment, international students are paying something like £29,000 a year, plus living expenses. So it's not far off what we're paying in the US. In France, I think all I paid was €350, and that was a healthcare surcharge. That was it. It was the least expensive thing I've ever done in my life. In Germany, typically university is free. The only exception to that is in the state of Baden-Württemberg, which is where Stuttgart is. And for that one, you pay €1,500 per semester. So it's €3,000 in a year. So all that to say, typically studying abroad, while it is expensive to go abroad, it's a lot less expensive to go abroad often than to stay, unless you have really, really good scholarships in the US. So that can be a huge incentive if you have the flexibility and the money to be able to travel elsewhere. So some possibilities, this is a bit of a list. Um, in Canada, of course, we know about McGill University. That's where Isabel Demers is. In the UK, we kind of have two options. We have the conservatoires, which include Birmingham. Dan Molt is there, and he's doing some fabulous things with Henry Fairs. And they've got a lot of visiting professors. Nathan Lauba comes and visits quite frequently, and they've got a massive collection of really great instruments. The Royal Academy of Music, David Titterington is the primary teacher there. Of course, it's in London. We also have universities. Now, universities in the UK, there are typically no performance degrees. These are going to be musicology degrees, for which you could have, one class be performance. So, of course, we've got Oxford, Cambridge, York, Leeds. That's even just scratching the surface. Also, St Andrews, of course, up in Scotland. In France, we have the conservatoire system. Again, people are highly specialized quite early. So you would enter the conservatoire system and never really take a non-music course again. The important distinction here to know is between the national conservatories and the regional conservatories. So the Conservatoires Nationaux Supérieurs de Musique, there are only two of them in the country. One is in Paris, that's the very famous one. One is in Lyon, which is less famous but should be just as famous. They're both excellent conservatories. They have now somewhat anglicized their degree programs, where you can now get a bachelor, I should say it this way, you can get a bachelor, a master, and a doctorat. So you can actually get a bachelor's degree from them. I would triple check, especially if you were trying to go on to a degree after going to one of these conservatories, in France in particular, if anywhere you want to do a master's degree or a PhD or a DMA would accept that degree, simply because in the US, they somewhat expect a liberal arts background or some sort of general education. So you just want to triple check that what you're getting is going to qualify you for what you want. If you're not necessarily going to go on for further academic degrees, it might not be a problem, but it's worth it to check. The regional conservatories are often where you're going to go and either just study for the joy of it, or and not kind of worry about any kind of degree, or you're going to do the imperfectionnement, the artist diploma. What's really important to know about these is that they're for students of all ages, actually. They're really quite cool. They're music schools. So you've got kids running around doing choral things. You've got, piano teachers who are teaching from age 5 all the way up to 65. So it ends up being a community thing more than anything else. And the imperfectionnement is kind of the exception to that. Those are for the elites who want to study in that place sometimes. So it's a really neat program that actually I've found allows you to integrate yourself even more into the community than necessarily the conservatoires on the national level. Of course, those are include like Toulouse, and that's probably the most famous one. But Bordeaux has one. You're gonna find them all over France. Pretty much every major city will have one. Germany, of course, we've got loads of music schools. We've got Berlin, we've got Leipzig, we've got Lübeck, Stuttgart, Munich, Hamburg. And that's only scratching the surface. All of these have fantastic teachers. You'll be able to get your bachelor, you'll be able to get your master, you'll be able to get higher level degrees, your concert exam, things like that. Something important to note if you ever wanted to live and work in Germany as a church musician is that they have a very strong distinction between a organ degree and a church music degree. The church music degree is much more intense. You're going to have specialized courses. They're going to make sure you do conducting. They're going to make sure you cover all of those bases. The organ degree is going to be focused on playing. You'll have a lot fewer academic requirements, and they're going to expect you to be in practice room all the time. So if you want to be taking a church music degree in Germany, if you're going to be wanting to take a church music position in Germany, you must have a church music degree. It's extremely unusual not to. It is possible. There's always an asterisk on anything I say. There's no absolutes in any of this. But I've had people turned away from positions and not legally be able to be considered because there are laws about what qualifications people have to be in order to apply for certain jobs. So just be aware and do your research and ask questions. In the Netherlands, we've got Amsterdam, we've got The Hague. They all have fabulous, fabulous instruments, fabulous teachers. Highly recommend. In Belgium, we've got Bruxelles, we've got Liège. And then, of course, in Switzerland, we've got Lucerne and Basel. There are more than this list, but these are perhaps the core ones to keep in mind. um, in order, organ study anywhere. Every school, of course, in the US, abroad, around the world, will have different faculty. Pick one that you want to work with once a week for several hours and be slightly tortured by in a very kind way. Pick somebody you're interested in. Pick somebody who you really think will be able to draw something out of you and or connect you with things that will help you to grow as a musician and as a person. Pick people with networks, pick schools with networks. These can be alumni networks, these can be connections to the region, these can be international networks. Just think more broadly than just the institution as much as you can. Each one will have different funding and student support. When you study abroad a lot, you're kind of left on your own. So that level of independence is really, really good, but also each institution will still have a different level. Some have an international student office. That's hugely helpful. Many do not. So just be aware of kind of what you'll need in order to be successful. They'll also have a massive variety and availability of instruments. A few years ago, when I was in Germany, I actually did a couple blog posts about all the institutions I'd studied in. So I did one about the practice organs at Oberlin, Toulouse, Stuttgart, and just essentially talking about not only the types of instruments, but their availability, how many students there are, how much time you actually get to practice in the end. So talk to current students and see what is available, see what you can take advantage of, see what the access is to organs in town, in the region, even around the country. Just be aware that there's going to be different things available at any institution. They also might have different language requirements. For example, in Germany, typically the organ masters or the organ degrees at the conservatories don't require you to speak German. You can do that degree in English or German. The church music ones will require you to speak German to a certain level, and they will have language exam requirements. So just be aware what you will be eligible for. Funding, everybody's favorite thing. All right, so different funding for different places. Look locally. Look at let's see. Yeah, look locally. Look where you are. See if the I've had people get funding from boys and girls clubs. Be aware that there is different funding available, and you will be able to scrounge it up. Look where you want to go. Look at the country. Look at the region. Look at the city. Just be curious. Ask questions. It doesn't hurt to ask. The worst they can say is no. Specific scholarships to bear in mind. We've got Fulbright. If you haven't heard of Fulbright, it's essentially an international scholarship program. First of all, for Americans to go and study abroad, and also for people from abroad to come to the US, typically as teaching assistants or things like that. Fulbright will fund typically 1 year abroad as a teaching assistant, as a international student, whether at an institution or otherwise. It will also do different levels, so professors can get Fulbrights, things like that. So there's a big quantity of Fulbrights that different people can be eligible for. Something to bear in mind with Fulbright is that the number of scholarships is contingent upon the country. So, for example, France might have 21 available, Germany might have 38, and England might have 55. So, have a look at the country that you'd be interested in studying with, and also look very closely at their country specific requirements, because I remember discovering one little tiny requirement in the Fulbright application for France that I'm really glad I found at the last minute, because it was very well hidden and I think it was essential in the application. Freight Huntington Beebe is a really good Boston-based one to know about. You don't have to be in Boston. I think you just have to be a U.S. resident. You could just go study abroad with this. It's $22,000. Essentially, you don't have to be at an institution. You can just have a really good reason to go to Germany and play a Zilbermann for a while. So it requires an application and a letter and I think a project proposal, things like that. So that's a really important one to keep in mind, particularly if you don't really want to go to an institution and get a degree. DAAD is the very famous Germany equivalent of the Fulbright. That one has specific scholarships for the degree programs that you have. So the DAAD that I had was a master in music. It was specifically for that. So it has a very specific application process. There are different ones for all over Germany, different degrees. Swiss Government Excellence Scholarships is a really good one to do if you wanted to go to Switzerland. The Harriet Hale Woolley Scholarship, I believe, helps you to find accommodation if you're studying in Paris. So that's a very good one to keep in mind as well. If you're interested in the University of Cambridge in the UK, Gates Scholarship, equivalent at Oxford, is a Rhodes. More funding things, do your research, just Google. You really can find a lot more than you would expect. Go online, ask around for ideas and funding. People will know about random things. Ask your school, university. Often there's some kind of study abroad and grants office. I worked a lot with them when I was in my undergrad. Ask your teachers, colleagues, people who have studied abroad, friends. Ask your neighbor. Ask anybody, because it's always good to make sure that you're paying as little as possible for your education so that you can really start off on the right foot when you get out. Funding in university applications. So read all the requirements as carefully as possible. Sometimes they'll want you to have a certain formatting in the header. Just read everything. Connect with the teachers that you want to study with. The Fulbright and the DAAD both required letters of support from the teachers that I wanted to work with. And the better that I knew them, the better letter they could write. So connect with those teachers. Yeah, I've already said that. Draft anything that they want you to write. Edit it, share it with grant writers, refine it, edit again. I think my Fulbright application, I may have spent a full year on it, but that was not wasted time. I learned to write so much better as a result of that process. And the Fulbright application, it was two things. It was a project proposal and a personal statement. It was 3 pages of writing. I promise I did other things with my time. But that meant that I had the most polished pieces of writing that I had ever submitted to anything. So that when the application readers were reading that, they could see the most polished version of me in my prose. So really take the time to do what you need to do. Unfortunately, even if you get funding, you often need money to get started. And this is one of the most disappointing things that I've found with these sorts of funding. Fulbright, DAAD, the UK grants that I've had, all of these will not give you any money until you have a bank account in the new country. In order to get a bank account, typically you have to be there for almost a month, which means you need to be able to pay for a flight. You need to be able to pay for all of your living expenses to get started. I think this needs to be addressed, because I think it's a massive problem for those who are perhaps underfunded. And I think it's hugely problematic. But someday I will work to change that, and I will be in a position to do so, so we can make sure that everybody who deserves these scholarships gets to actually use them. Let's talk about a couple of practicalities of living abroad. So you're going to need a passport, obviously. Often you'll need a visa. This is through all different processes. Some of them you can start at home. I think I pretty much had my French passport before I left the country. Some of them you start in the country. So I arrived in Germany as a tourist and then had to apply for my visa, which felt very weird and like I could become illegal very quickly. That's just how it worked for Americans at the time when I was doing that. So be aware of that wonderful process. It's quite the adventure, and something I feel like we should all go through, because it gives you a lot more sympathy for people applying for visas all over the world, whether to the US or otherwise. Healthcare and travel insurance. Some many of my colleagues don't worry about this, but I particularly worry about it when I'm living abroad and coming back to the US, just making sure that I'm covered for emergencies. It's usually pretty inexpensive to get international based in the US. I think I pay $200 a year for my emergency medical insurance when I go back to the US. So just keep an eye out for it, especially if you have anxiety or want to make sure that you're just covered. It's always a good thing to keep in mind. When you're living abroad, accommodation can be really challenging. Go through university websites, go through your school's websites to see if you can find other people to live with. There's lots of house shares, lots of kind of, we called them in Germany, just where you rent a room in a house with a bunch of other students, lots of things like that. Go through reputable websites, find something that's safe, of course. Ask people who have been there, ask other people at the university, try and find the accommodation, and of course be prepared to pay a month or two up front. Bank accounts can be very fun to open. Just keep turning up and poking the bear to see if they will let you get it this time, because sometimes they just want one more piece of paper that they didn't tell you about last time. Just how it goes. Smile and come back the next day. Once you're abroad, triple check any institution related requirements, anything like you really need to pass in by a certain deadline. It's just always a good thing to keep in mind. I had the most ridiculous runaround at the end of my time in Germany, trying to go to the library to prove that I hadn't checked out the book they thought I had checked out, and to close down my library account in time to actually receive my graduation papers. It was just, yeah, Germany. Um, take language classes while you're there. That can be really, really useful. It'll also help you to meet people who are also living there as immigrants, as students, and kind of get you into a network there. Get used to what the currency conversion is, especially if you're drawing from a US account, so that you actually know what things cost. Enjoy the food. Ask people. Go to places that are busy. Go to well-reviewed places. Try some of the local cuisine. And also be aware that actually traveling with any kind of food-related challenges these days is so much more easy than it ever has been. Gluten-free, different kinds of really strong food allergies. You really pretty much can travel now, which is quite extraordinary and wasn't the case 15 or 20 years ago. Social life, go do things. A lot of universities and such will have different social groups. Things like the UK universities have more social groups than you'd ever be able to read through. It's absolutely extraordinary. You'll be able to find different international students, people with all different kinds of interests. So don't hesitate to really reach out and really get your people. Explore the cities. Explore, I don't know, down by the waterfronts. Explore all around wherever you're living. You're there to explore the instruments. You're there to explore the people. Just be curious in every step. Now let's do a little bit about performing abroad. So the first thing you're going to encounter is a lot of different kinds of organs. They're all going to have different combination actions. They're all going to have different sounds. They're all going to have different pedal boards, swell shoes, things that work, things that don't work, different acoustics. It is the most wild ride in the world. I absolutely love it. You're going to want to make sure that your programming takes into account not only the instruments, that goes without saying, but also what the audience is going to be like. I've had people request liturgical calendar year programs. I've had people request no sacred music, only sacred music, audience-friendly programs. And oh, that was an interesting one. They requested an audience-friendly program with the Reger BACH, which I'm a little confused about. Um, but maybe that was the exception to the audience-friendly program. Yeah, so you're probably going to want to have a variety of repertoire, because if you're playing a mean tone split sharp key short octave organ one day and then 3 days later you're playing, in Harlem, and then a couple days later you're playing in a concert hall in Helsinki, you're gonna want to play different repertoire in all of those. I'm just trying to think of examples. This April, I've been asked to play the Passion Symphony in one place. And then 3 days before that, I'm playing a two-manual Pazzi organ in Unequal Temperament. So none of that will overlap. And then 2 weeks later, I'm playing in a concert hall where the programs I programmed it 3 years ago. So that's all different repertoire. It's kind of how it goes. So you're going to figure out different sorts of programming, what you can pull back really quickly, what sorts of repertoire you want to really sink your teeth into if you're going to revive it, and also you'll discover the balance of programming new repertoire and how much you can really push yourself with that. I kind of really enjoy that challenge. Some other factors to be aware of: different transportation systems and delays. It's really fun. You figure out which discount cards you need. If you need the Deutsche Bahn discount card, if you need the French discount card, things like that, so you can save a little bit of money. You'll figure out which trains will always be delayed, so you don't want to leave too little of a connection time. You figure out kind of what you need. I always ask for a quiet room in hotels, and I don't know if it does anything, but it makes me feel a little bit better. You kind of figure out what if you really need a desk in order to get work done, what you need to do to sleep, if you need earplugs, eye masks, things like that. Just kind of sort what you do. I often travel with tea bags because you can always get hot water, and I love having tea in the evenings, case in point. Um, Finding food can be really tough whenever you play at concert halls. Practicing the graveyard shift of the 10 a.m. to 6 a.m. or the midnight to 9 a.m., and then you're trying to find food at 3 a.m. because you just got hungry in the middle of the practice session. Carry snacks if you can, if you get hungry, if that matters to you. And just know that sometimes you won't be able to find exactly what you're craving, but it'll probably always be good food. But it just can be a little adventure. And those times are really when it's valuable to have somebody else there who can kind of go find something that's palatable. Practice timings, again, can be extremely variable. I rarely play concerts now, but I've had to play concerts on only 2 hours of practice time. I prefer not to do that because I know I won't give my best version of myself, but I have. The most hours I ever spent on a program was at Longwood Gardens, and that was 24 full hours of practice because of the kind of orchestral program that was. And for me to feel comfortable, I really needed that time. Console assistance. Sometimes you will need assistance. I typically play without a page turner. I typically play for mini scores. But if you're in France, you kind of can't typically do those concerts on the cavaille instruments without one person on either side. And then all of a sudden, organ playing becomes a team sport, and it's fabulous. So get used to having people in your personal space a little bit. You'll hit elbows. It's great. Other factors: a bit more administration, visas if you need them in order to travel. We're very lucky as Americans. We really need fairly few of them, but just make sure you know if this is a priority for you so you can sleep at night. Make sure you know what's required. Again, travel insurance. Invoices, every country will want something different. The payments will probably come in different currencies. They'll want different kind of information from you than you'll need in the US. Taxes. Sometimes they'll need to take out taxes for you in the foreign country, and then when you file your taxes in the US, you can write those off as a credit, which is useful. But above all, when working, studying, and living abroad, or at home, frankly, just figure out what you need in order to play and feel your best, because truly that is the bottom line, the biggest priority. So thank you very much. I'd be glad for any questions that have come up, or feel free to write to me later. My email is online on my website. It's caitlin.emerson@gmail.com, but really don't hesitate to reach out. So thanks, guys, for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Caitlin.
Thanks.
So if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or put the question in the chat here. I know I have one, which is, what led you to be interested in this all?
Oh, I think I was always a glutton for wanting to travel, and I think that's also one reason why I went into the organ. You can't really do this without some kind of travel. Either you travel for the job, or you're traveling around to explore the instruments to get to playing better. So I find it really, it was really always the travel for me, actually, and the instrument enables that, and you also get to explore all of the instruments. So yeah, I think it was kind of hand in hand with everything that I've always wanted to do, and I feel unbelievably lucky to be. I keep calling it a phase. I absolutely love what I'm doing, and I'm so glad the phase hasn't ended, and fingers crossed, we'll see.
Awesome. Any other questions from anyone? I think it was just a lot of good information to to
Including that
share.
out of me. That's very fair.
Well, if anybody does have any questions at any point, like you said, feel free to contact, reach out. This presentation was also recorded, so you'll be able to go back and relook through things if there are things that kind of come up for you that you want questions about. William Tan asked, what was your weirdest experience?
Um, oh, that's a really good one. I need to start writing them down actually more than anything else. Um, I think I think kind of one of the if I can rephrase that to being kind of one of the most exciting ones, just because weirdest one isn't immediately coming to mind, although I will have to get back to you on that. Was this past summer I did 3 concerts in Denmark, and I did them all out of order. I registered everything in the complete wrong order and then would play the other concert before I went back to play the ones I'd already registered. So that was it was weird to keep the 3 different organs and the 3 different programs in my head, and I kind of loved that because it integrated all the instruments and made each concert really really special actually. So I loved that. That was just super fun.
That's awesome. Another question we have here from Tracy is averagely, how long do you need to register on a new organ?
Sure. I typically ask if they would set aside 12 hours. That's also just a Karen McFarlane standardization, so I've kind of adopted that. Um, Most organs, I really like to have 6 to 8 hours. And that means I'll feel really, really comfortable. But like I said, Longwood was 24 hours. That thankfully that was over 3 days. I'm not quite. I like sleep too much. Yeah. So what I always say is I really almost more than the practice time, although these two things go hand in hand, what I need is the sleep. So I need to sleep on an instrument, not literally, but I like to arrive on Friday, meet the organ for an hour or two, and then Saturday do the lion's share of practicing. I always practice. I register everything, then I play everything into the recorder, and that recorder is not just giving me balances in the room, but it's also giving me my interpretation on that instrument as heard by the recorder. And I know some of the weird proclivities of that recorder, so I can then adjust the registrations and adjust my playing so that it will work best on that particular instrument and hopefully for that audience, because really that's the priority, is making sure that I can invite people along, hold them by the hand for that particular with that particular repertoire with me and with that instrument. So I find that, yeah, I find that 6 to 8 hours but spread out over the 2 days before is really really helpful.
Great. All right, next question comes from Jacob. What were some of your favorite organs?
Ooh, I find the ones that are most rewarding to play are often those that have a generous acoustic that allows you to kind of shape into the silence. So often, if we have a dry acoustic, it's just the key goes off, and all of a sudden it's a very square end. So since the organ is a machine, we kind of have to help it and massage those endings so that we can keep the lines going. An acoustic really just makes that way easier. So I would say that the favorite stop on the organ is probably the acoustic. Favorite organs, I always say whichever one I'm playing next, or whichever one I'm playing for this concert, because if we don't like the instrument that we're playing, then we're not going to play as good of a concert. But I certainly have favorite instruments tied to favorite repertoire too, and it just fits like a glove, or when it's a real surprise. I was playing, this was, gosh, nearly 2 decades ago in Goshen, Indiana. Gorgeous instrument out there. Two manual tracker, unequal temperament. And I sat down and thought, huh, I could play Rager here. And I did, and it was fabulous. It was just such a blast. So, yeah, that was such fun.
That is such fun. All right, next question is, which country, this comes from Layla, which country have you enjoyed working in the most?
It would be really tough to rank them. Living wise, what I always say is once you've lived abroad, you can't call one place home. There's always going to be things that you like about each country that you will miss if you go elsewhere. That's probably the bittersweet part of living abroad, is that you can't quite feel like, oh, I'm completely settled now, because you might be back in the U.S. and saying, yeah, but I'd really wish I could get a good French baguette. Um, or in Germany going, oh, I'd really like a French baguette, but gosh, this rye bread is really good. So At the moment, most of the time I'm living in England, so I'm very much enjoying that. That's quite an adventure. I'm doing some really exciting things here. I'm really involved in educational initiatives, really doing some concert series and stuff like that. So I'm absolutely loving what I'm doing right now. So if I had to pick one off right off the bat, probably the current one.
All right, and we're gonna ask one more question before we switch to our next speaker, which is, have you ever missed a concert due to travel issues? And then there's a little note here, maybe not weather related, also could be oversleeping.
Thankfully, most organ concerts don't happen in the morning. Um, although oversleeping is a very fair question when you've got terrible, terrible practice times. No, not because of oversleeping, thank God. I did have a flat tire once that made me almost late for a concert, so now I get there early, like an hour, 2 hours early. We don't do the 30 minutes anymore. Um, Travel, actually, I had a cancellation last year because of travel. Nashville, that when they had that massive snow and ice storm, I was in England, and they phoned me the day I was supposed to fly out to go to Nashville, and they said, "I'm so sorry, but we have to cancel because of the weather." So that wasn't necessarily like a, I couldn't get there, but it was them saying, we can't ask people to go out in this weather. And absolutely fair enough. I'm very happy to be playing that concert again in April. So we've picked it right up, which is really nice. So no oversleeping, thank God. I'm too light of a sleeper, I think.
Well, thank you so much. This was really great to hear about this all. Thank you so much for kicking off our conference. And of course, if anybody else has any questions, we'll have them reach out to you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. I might go to bed. We've got a master class tomorrow morning with Thomas Lacote, so gotta get up early to let people into chapel. So take care.
Well, good luck. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
All right. Up next, we have Layla, who's going to give us a really great presentation here. So I'm going to ask her to unmute and share her screen.
Okay.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Take it away.
All right, so good evening, everyone. I'm Layla Joshi. I'm a 10th grader at the William Penn Charter School, and thank you for having me present today. I'm really proud to be a member of the AGO because I remember at the pipe organ experience and at the AGO convention, I got to meet a lot of great young organists, including Lindsay, and it was really awesome. So the reason I've begun working on this project is mainly because the instrument I play every day is a Marcuson organ. And as I've met other organists, I've realized the sheer amount of historical knowledge that's required as an organist. And I thought, what better way to acquire that knowledge than to begin learning more about my very own instrument? And my choir was also lucky enough to travel to Denmark on a tour, which solidified my interest in this research. So, Marcuson and Son were founded in 1806 by Jürgen Marcuson, and in 1811 they were granted a license to build organs by King Frederick VI of Denmark. After being annexed to Germany as a result of being based in Abenraa from 1864 to 1920, Marcuson organs were heavily influenced by North German technique and attracted buyers for both their reliability and aesthetic. While these commissions were mostly focused on restoration and rebuilding, in 1819 the group were able to build its first organ in Zizeby Church near the city of Schleswig. The next big change for the company was a partnership with Andreas Reuter, who had apprenticed with Jürgen Marcuson previously, and in 1826 became his business partner. This collaboration ushered in a new era for Marcuson, which was renamed as Marcuson and Reuter. Marcuson were very influential outside of the organ reform movement as well. Two of their main early technological contributions were the Reuter tuning slot and box bellows. While working on the Roskilde Cathedral main organ, Reuter invented his tuning slot, and the tuning slot aids with voicing and allows for more control over the instrument. Marcuson's invention of the box bellows was inspired by a sewing machine because it consisted of a small box conducting air into a larger one. The design would serve as the major method for providing the organ's airflow for the next 100 years until electric blowers rose to prominence. At the time, Marcuson and Reuter vaulted the Marcuson name to distinction, and in 1836 the company was awarded with the title of Organ Builders to the Royal Court of Denmark. During the mid-1800s, after the death of Andreas Reuter, ownership of Marcuson and Reuter changed hands to those of Jürgen Andreas Marcuson. It was at this time that the name of the company was changed to the one we know today, Marcuson and Son. Pipe organs also began to be more influenced by the building styles of Romanticism, and after the early death of Jürgen Andreas' successor, Johannes Lassen Zachariasen took over the company and committed fully to the Romantic style of organ building. The style that Zachariasen favored necessitated the use of advanced pneumatic technology, which exploits different levels of wind pressure in different areas of the wind chest. This technology made it easier for organs to feature octave couplers, the crescendo pedal, and free combination pedals that allowed organists to make stop changes while playing. All these characteristics were necessary to match the Romantic music being written, and were made much cheaper using the new pneumatic technology. Marcuson's use of this technology kept the company popular and allowed much of the new music of the time to be played in proper style. So the initiation of the organ reform movement is mostly credited to Albert Schweitzer. Albert Schweitzer was a multi-talented individual as a physician, missionary, philosopher, and organist. Schweitzer strongly advocated that the Alsatian Silbermann organ, with its combination of French and German sound, was the best organ for Bach. And in addition to Schweitzer's advocacy, there are records of Bach's approval for the Silbermann organ. The organ building world in the early 1900s, around 1920, had also developed an interest in Baroque organ thanks to the influential Schnitger organ in Hamburg's St. Jacobi Church. Schweitzer claimed that he did not initiate the movement, but he did not oppose its presence either. While this movement also existed in Denmark, it was more limited and came about in a different way. Cor Etzkes, a Dutch organ builder, writes that he was urged by Dutch organist Johannes Legene to take a tour of Danish organs in 1946, which he did with Finn Widerøe. On the tour, Etzkes witnessed the Romantic style of organ building in full swing, but he nonetheless notes how well made the instruments were. Johannes Legene would proceed to invite organ builders Paul Gerard and Schuppen Zachariasen to take a tour of the Dutch organs because of the lack of historical organs in Denmark. When they returned, they were inspired to try the techniques for themselves and began to experiment with the neo-Baroque style. In 1956, many were drawn to Denmark for Marcuson's 50th anniversary jubilee. The guest list included almost all famous participants in the Danish organ reform movement, and many, such as Marie-Claire Alain, were surprised by the high quality of the organ's action. Alain would go on to make several recordings on Danish organs, citing their difference in sound from the French as why. Later in the movement, to fund the Danish Organ Weeks, the event would form strong connections with Danish breweries, which allowed the tradition to continue until the 1960s, showcasing the ties across fields that the movement brought about in the small country. As I previously mentioned, Albert Schweitzer was one of the most important figures in this movement. However, there are many others who also influenced its success in Denmark. The German organist, Karl Straube, did not just support the movement as an organizer, but he also did as an artist. Straube is remembered as very accepting of the new concepts in the organ world, and in accordance to this, he supported the Romantic organ, saying that the people do not sense that everything artistic is born by a general spiritual mentality. Otherwise, they could not render such stupid judgments about the Romantic organ, as if it were a technical plaything and absolute nonsense, whereas it actually embodies the overheated dynamic aspirations. However, Straube, regardless of his support of the organ reform movement, was reluctant to wholly support either side and either style, and opted for attempting to render pieces accurately, regardless of the instrument. In addition to Straube, Zachariasen and Frobenius helped promote the movement through their dedication to the craft of organ building and their willingness to bring new style to the country of Denmark. The organ reform movement was limited for several years in both Denmark and Germany. The hindrance in Germany was World War II. The war made it difficult to acquire supplies, which hampered the building of new organs in Germany. And in Denmark, supplies were easily accessible, so the movement was allowed to flourish there when Germany could not sustain it. The difficulty with Denmark was its lack of historical organs. There were so few remaining historical organs in Denmark that builders had to travel to Germany or Holland to truly experience the sound of a Baroque organ. While this did not limit the short-term success of builders in Denmark, it might have been one of the reasons Danish builders were surpassed by foreign companies. Another limitation to the Danish turned out to be Finnvidero. Videro was supposed to receive a job at the Danish Conservatory, but when he didn't get it, the Danish lost the support that his fame would have brought to the country and to the movement. The experience of Marcuson and Sons in this movement was greatly impacted by financial and economic decisions, as most are, and was spearheaded by Supran Zachariasen. Zachariasen has visited many historic organs in Germany and made extensive annotations on their creation. When the area that Marcuson was based in, Abenra, was reclaimed by Denmark, the firm had to begin anew and adapt to the change in markets. Shortly after, Zachariasen took his trip to the Netherlands and continued to acquire more knowledge of the old organs. The firm began to build in this style and were at the height of their prominence while working with the voicer Adolf Weding. The Marcuson action was similar to Cavaillé organs, and this is demonstrated in the Nikolai Church in Copenhagen. The action of this organ aligned with the time because it was possible to see that style of balanced action on other old organs. The benefits of Marcuson's historical instruments were also greatly aligned with the overall benefits of the movement as a whole. The return to tracker action created greater historical accuracy and made playing easier regarding Bach. Tracker action is also hailed by many as creating a greater connection between the organist and the instrument, which is part of why the old organ had such appeal. The old style of organ is also very versatile and allows one to play simple pieces for church as well as complex solos, with equal ability and distinction. Having played a few historical organs, such as the one pictured above, located in St. Bavelkirk in Haarlem, I can attest to all of these benefits, though I would add that the style of church has evolved, so an old-style organ might not sound accurate simply because of acoustics. A notable Marcuson organ, which is based off Baroque style, is located in Frederiksborg Palace Chapel in Hillerød, Denmark. After a fire burned down the old organ in 1859, Marcuson began work on the new one. The organ was completed in 1864 and consisted of 25 stops distributed over the grate, chorale prelude division, and a pedal. The organ had a traditional classic action and was designed for the playing of early Romantic music. The organ was supplied wind by 6 box bellows, and in 1994 Frobenius and Sons enlarged the organ. The changes to the organ paved the way for even more massive alterations, which were carried out by Paul Gerard Andersen. The chapel had called for a larger organ to allow for more concerts, and because of this, the Marcuson organ was pushed to the back of the facade to make way for a new instrument. Fortunately, in 2002, the old organ was completely restored and recreated by Marcuson. The original Marcuson organ was not able to be moved from behind the Andersen organ, and because of this, the old wind system, containing 6 box bellows, was not able to be reinstated. The stop action on the grate remains the same from 1864, however the action on the chorale prelude division needed to be restored. The original tuning action was reintroduced to the pipework, resulting in lengthened pipes and the removal of any unoriginal soldering. Original stops were preserved, such as the trumpet 8-foot on the grate, and many were recreated according to the original scales. The bassoon 16-foot and euphonia 8-foot are notable because they are free reeds. Free reeds are thin pieces of metal that are only secured to the instrument on one side, allowing for the other end to vibrate and produce a sound similar to the harmonium. The tuning of these reeds is determined mostly by length, and tone can be determined by thickness, shape, and curvature of the reed. These reeds exist in a few organs, but were still used and maintained by Marcuson. This organ might seem loud from the loft, but when heard from below produces a rich sound that fills the beautiful hall. I've been in this hall and it's absolutely stunning, but when my choir visited Denmark, we also were able to sing here, which was an amazing experience. The organ in Roskilde Cathedral is also one of the most historic in the world. The church that it lies in is in Roskilde, Denmark, and dates back to the Gothic era. Several pieces of construction, including the pulpit, facade of the positive, and several pipes date back to this time, giving the organ its label of historic. The history of this organ begins with Dutchman Herman Raphaelus Rotestein-Pock, who decided to build a new organ for the church in 1554. This organ stood until 1611 when it was rebuilt by Nicholas Maas. It was not until 1654 that the organ was rebuilt again by Gregor Mulisch and Peter Bots. This rebuild resulted in the addition of Baroque decorations to the facade and a small upper positive. The majority of current historical pipes also date back to this rebuild, with the entire facade being pipes from this year. Unfortunately, the casing of the Hauptwerk and pedal were altered in such a manner that the pedal was removed from the case and re-erected behind the organ. It was also during this time that Reuter discovered the tuning slot, which had a significant impact. The organ remained undisturbed until significant tonal and technical problems were discovered by Cor Etzkes in the 1980s. These findings and the large number of old pipes led to the recreation of a classical Danish organ by Markussen. Aided by their extensive archives, the organ was placed on the original floor level and had its cases reconstructed. Markussen, as accurately as possible, replicated the pipe scales, alloys, and methods of construction according to old models, and they even used the old Rook-positive chest as a model for the bellows. This organ is a perfect example of the importance of having a knowledge of historical instruments when carrying out a rebuild. The influence of Markussen and the organ reform movement had many widespread effects. The firm was able to pioneer the movement within Denmark thanks to its archives and Zachariason's annotations, and the new style allowed for attention to be drawn to the world-class organs in Denmark. The movement also allowed for technological advances such as reed shallots, the slider chest, and the centrifugal fan blower. However, the movement also spread to America and created a new brand of the American organ. Interest in building old instruments did not just end in Europe, and the picture shown above is proof. Some of the most beautiful organs I've played have been at places like Rice University and Eastman School for Music, where the organs are not old, but are so well researched that they compare with the likes of the organ at St. Babakirk. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and thank you so much to the organizer of this conference. I really enjoyed the presentation that I've heard, and it's definitely inspiring me to continue doing my research. And if anyone listening would be further interested in collaborating with me, particularly to publish some work about this, I'd really love that. And in the meantime, I'd be happy to answer any questions or discussions.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. That was so cool to learn about all that all. Where is your church located at that you have this organ at?
Oh, I live in Morristown, New Jersey, so it's the First Presbyterian Church of Morristown.
Great. And when you were researching this, was there anything that came up that you thought was surprising or not what you would have guessed it would have been?
I think I was very much surprised by how much effect Markussen had. I went into the research kind of thinking that Markussen was a very small or niche company, but kind of seeing the effect that it had and the people it got to work with was very interesting to me.
That is very cool. And when you were kind of exploring those different aspects and finding all those different connections, do you think that us as other organists, being able to look into our own organs and kind of research that history, what value do you find in that?
I think it's a very important thing personally when I go to like a pipe organ experience or a summer program. I'm surrounded by people who love the instrument and they always seem to know, I feel like they always know so much more than me about whatever instrument we're playing. And I think that kind of motivated me to kind of start learning about things. And even like exploring your own instrument is a perfect way to start that because you actually have a perspective on that and you have a certain level of investment in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, cool. Does anybody else have any other questions here? You can pop them in the chat. We got one from Daniel. It says, what is your favorite part about these types of organs? Is it the sound? Is it something more mechanical, something with the touch?
I think my favorite part has to be the simplicity of the organ. I think when I play, when I first started playing the organ 4 years ago, I didn't know what any stops meant. I didn't understand anything. So I would just pull out random stops and I couldn't actually seem to make something that sounded bad. And I think it's honestly an amazing thing having played more organs now, of course, that I can just pick anything and almost everything will work out.
That is really significant because I know that some instruments you pull things out and you go, oh, that's not exactly what I wanted that to be like. So that's really great. Andrew also just commented that he really also enjoys researching the 20th century organ reform. So that's really awesome. Where do you see this research kind of taking you next?
I definitely like to do some writing about this. I think this presentation started as a little bit of writing, but I'd like to continue that and maybe publish some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll invite you, as well as any of the other presenters here. You are always welcome to write for TAO, for the AGO. I can send you all the information, and this goes for anybody in the Young Organist that would be interested in this. It's great to get it published in the magazine. You get a little bit of experience in being able to work with an editor to get feedback about that, about how it's going to look. And then when it's published, it's really great because then you can share that with other AGO members through the TAO and it being online. So I definitely encourage you to do that because it sounds like that's right where you are.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Another question. Are there any other organ builders that you're interested in researching?
Well, from this research, I learned a little bit about the Zilberman organ, so I think that would be interesting, as well as Cavaiocoli because they had so much influence on other builders. I think starting large and then maybe going more niche again would be probably what I would be interested in doing.
Well, that's really great, especially being able to pull in other things that you've been researching. Well, awesome. This was really great. Thank you so much for presenting.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And if anybody has any questions, throughout, feel free to do that. Oh, sorry, we just got one more. If I want to start my own organ research, where should I start?
I started with the website. I went to the Markuson website. It is a very great website. They have the entire history written out in a little bit of detail. And I think you just kind of start from there. You basically have to draft like a rough sketch paragraph. And then I would go through the paragraph and I'd say, what do I not know in this paragraph? And I just kind of look up individual things that I came across. And you basically have to you can start by basing it off of what you've seen written, but then you start asking your own questions about, oh, what am I writing? And it also will drive you to have more topics of research and be more interested in other things as well.
That's really cool. And that's really great advice because I think starting research is always the most intimidating part of
Yeah.
it because you don't know where you're starting. But that's
Mhm.
really great how you just suggested to kind of break it down and look up those individual pieces. So awesome. All right. So we're going to switch over now to our next one a little bit early here, if that's all right with you, Brett.
I'm ready.
So awesome. So I recommend everybody again, speaker mode will be great for this as we share some things. And this is also another thanks to our sponsor for this event. So go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michelle. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Brett Milan. I am the founder and CEO of Milan Digital Audio, and we are the developers of the Halprick Virtual Pipe Organ software. Very happy to be here tonight presenting and sponsoring the AGYO virtual conference. So we're going to have some fun tonight. We're going to go through the software and we're going to focus tonight on a few things, just a few little topics because we have only 30 minutes. We're going to talk about some of the aspects that Halprick can be used for as an educational tool. And it's actually quite interesting listening to what Layla was just saying about how she's learning all these things with the organs that she never knew before. And she's got a much bigger head start than I had. I didn't start organ until I was in college. So good for you and everyone else that's listening and watching for getting into this. So first, if no one knows what Halperick is, hopefully you've heard of it. If you haven't, it's software for your Mac and PC that allows you to play sampled pipe organs very realistically, either at your own home through a MIDI pipe organ console or in church, in theaters, concert halls. It's been used around the world for all sorts of purposes. So it's pretty cool. We basically show up to the church with microphones set up and record every pipe of every stop, every sound, every stop pull, every key noise, every swell box creak. It's very realistic. It takes a lot of time, but the end results are really worth it. And when people hear it for the first time, they're usually wondering, how does it sound like that? Well, we're going to show you some of the things today, how we'll listen to it and play with it, but also show you how you can learn more just about organ playing in general, but also more specifically about the builders, the time period, and how different things, composers and builders, affected one another. I think that's basically it. So let's get started. We're going to switch views here, and we've got an organ loaded. This is the Arpschnicker organ from Kappel, Germany, built in 1680. The reason I wanted to start with this organ is because when I was at college, during our classes, we had to listen to CDs of organists perform, and the teacher would say, "This is what an Arpschnicker organ sounds like." And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if we could just play it and not have to listen to a preset recording that we can't change registrations, or, say maybe the organist did something that I wouldn't have done. So, now that's actually possible. So this could be used in a classroom to show students, how does an individual stop sound? How does building different type of plenums sound? So we're going to go through a few of those little steps and have some fun doing this. So real quick, let me backtrack before we get going there. Why I started doing this, I originally wanted to hear how I sounded as a performer. I started with piano, and then I went to organ while I was at college. During that time, I bought some recording gear, simple little tape deck and a microphone, just to record myself to hear how I sounded. Because if you think about when you hear a recording of your voice played back later, you're like, oh, that's how I sound? I didn't realize I sounded like that. And I feel it's the same with music. When you're playing, it's in your head, you're doing it live. It could be slightly different than when you listen to a recorded playback later. So one of the really cool functions of Halperick is the built-in recording option. So we're just going to do a quick little recording here of myself playing, and I don't really practice too much anymore. Unfortunately, I just don't have the time for it, so excuse any mistakes. So I'm just going to, let me pull a couple stops here first. Hopefully everyone can hear all that, the stop noises coming out. And we're going to hit record. And I'm going to play a little ditty. Oh, my stops went away. Okay, so not an organ piece, but it's a recording. So we just recorded that. We're going to save it, and now we can play it back via MIDI, which we're not going to get into the details of exactly what MIDI means, but it's digital information which captured all the stop changes and keystrokes and plays back the organ just the way I played it. So let's hit play. And we're going to hear a lot of mistakes here because that was not the best performance, but it serves the purpose. So, okay, there's no sense of listening to it at full speed. What we can do is change the tempo and play it a little bit slower, and then you're really going to hear where your articulations are going. even slower. And this is how you should practice, slowly. I know everyone wants to get on that organ and perform like a concert, but you'll do yourself a favor practicing slow. Yeah, see, you can hear all sorts of two legato here, smush notes there, but so that's just one pretty neat aspect that you can use to really hone in on your technique and listen, again, outside of your own head while you're playing. Play it back later, step away, and think about what you're playing and listening to, and hopefully make some recommendations and improvements to yourself and become a better organist. So now, if someone doesn't have Halprick and you're wondering, well, how can I do this because I don't have Halprick? You can still do it. I'm sure everyone's got a phone. Use your cell phone. There's my camera. There it is. Things like Zoom recorders. These little things are great. You can bring it with you in your bag, throw it on a music stand or on the end of the stage, whatever. Record yourself, bring it back home, listen. I can't stress enough how important that is to really listen to yourself play. I know a lot of people will wait till right before a big performance and start cram recording and doing some things like that, and sometimes it's too late. So every time you practice, throw that recorder on, and I think you're going to appreciate that. So now let's get back to some of the other fun stuff. Registrations is something I think is obviously, depending on the repertoire, the Baroque repertoire, it's not always written, and you need to sort of have knowledge of, what did the composer intend to register this piece. So, we basically, a lot of times, at least I did, we would go by recordings that we've heard from famous organists or what your organ teacher would teach you. Sometimes it's good to just, let me just try my own thing and see how it sounds. So we're going to do a little bit of that today. We're going to go to another screen here that's got larger stop controls. So obviously the original Schnicker organ didn't have a built-in combination system, but we include it for ease. You can see here there's some preset registrations. So what we're going to do, I've actually got another MIDI file that I want to load. This is Bach chorale, and let's see, we're going to start it with what I think is a pretty typical registration. Let's try something like this. You can't see what I'm doing here. So on the very outside of each side is the Rook Positive, which is the bottom manual here. The top manual is the Hauptwerk. I love that name. Manual, and then the pedal is the innermost column. So we're gonna do, let's see, Nocturne 2, and let's add the flute 4, and we're gonna play this chorale here. Now notice the pedal board in this organ, and this is accurate to the original. It only goes up to a D. So this particular piece, the pedal part, chorale melody, goes up to an F sharp, I believe. So it calls for a 4-foot pedal stop for the chorale. Well, you can't do that on this organ because you'll miss a couple top notes. So what we're doing is pulling the 2-foot in the pedal, and we're going to play it an octave lower, which is commonly done. So this is a great way to learn, how do you overcome obstacles, for older organs that don't have the entire range you need. So let's go back. Actually, I've got it set to go. Now, I'm going to throw the 2-foot cornet on. Now that melody really stands out. Now I'm going to couple the manuals. maybe a little too heavy. Get rid of the principal 8. Beautiful, short little piece. So just in that minute and something piece, you can see there's, it's very easy to change registrations and play around. You could do something like this if you really just wanted to have a laugh. I'm not saying that's what's intended, but you get to do these things with Halpert. So this is just, for me, I wish I could have had this when I was at college, and for learning, or the teacher could have had it to teach me. So if there's any teachers out there listening right now, or you students, tell your teachers, say, hey, this is something we could really learn from. I think they might be open to that. So let's see what else with this one. Yeah. Oh, another thing that we would talk about in organ class was the timbre of the individual stops. And it was all spoken by the teacher, and we're like, well, I don't really know what that's going to sound like. So as a quick little demo, principal 8 on the Halpert, and we're just going to play some scales going up, and you can hear how this rank sounds. What's going on? Here we go. Very lovely. So now the whole flute 8. And, you can go through all the stops individual. Spitz flute 4. This is a fun one. The Zimbelstern. Sometimes you'll see these on organs. I'm going to start it now while I talk, because it starts to spin slow and takes the time to get up. So like I said, we sample everything, and you really get to know what these organs are about. So pretty neat. Now I have one more demo I'd like to do with this organ, and then we're going to switch to a different instrument. Let's load the file. I believe it is this. This is Buxtehude Fuga in C major. I forgot to show you the sheet music for the last one, but that's okay. So now with this, I want to go over pitch and temperament. This is another great tool that Halpert offers that you don't really, it's hard to know what the different temperaments are, because once an organ is tuned, it's usually equal temperament, at least mostly in the States here, and you just have to play with that. You're not going to go retune thousands of pipes for different repertoire for different temperaments. So here, all the organs have the option to come with what's called the original organ temperament, which is how it was recorded, but there's also a list of all these pre-included temperaments with Halpert, and you can just click on one and it instantly loads. We're going to open this quarter comma mean tone, which goes over well in these North German Baroque organs, this Buxtehude fugue. Excuse me. Now you're going to hear these are famous for what's called the wolf tone. It's very dissonant if you play in key signatures that are not meant to be played in at this time. So let's play C major. Well, and you pull a stop. Very pure. The third is pure. Now, if you compare that to the original, it changes on the fly, so you can hear the pitch change. So it's very, very pure. Now we're going to go up, D flat major. See that? There's nothing written in that key for this time period. D major. E flat. Those two are okay. E major. Not bad. You can hear a little beating. F major. Now, this F sharp major, if you like this one, and I don't know. Oh, so we go back to normal original. You can hear the difference. G, A flat, that's a bad one. A major, not bad. B flat major, and then back to C. So being able to hear these temperaments, just playing around with them, you know exactly, what's going to happen. So we're going to use this temperament for this little demo here so you can see how it sounds in a piece of music. And also, if you look at the top here where my mouse is hovering, the bass pitch says 468.7. That is the pitch of the organ in the room when the organ was sampled. It's just a lot of these organs, they change pitch, or it may have been tuned that way for a particular reason. So if you want, so here again, we can switch to 440 bass pitch. It's going to drop on the fly. But I like to keep things at the original organ pitch just because it's more authentic. So anyone with perfect pitch out there, I apologize. It's a little sharp, but that's something else you'll have to learn to deal with in the real world too. Okay, so we've got this Buxtehude fugue loaded. I think the registration will automatically come on. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. And once we get the other voices, you'll start hearing the harmonies of the temperaments. Okay, so you get the idea. Oh, you can change the tempo too. Obviously, really fast. That was not on purpose. So, 25%. You can really hone in on your articulations if you really wanted to. It's pretty cool. So, that's just one more really great aspect, I think, of Halperk and how it can help you learn. Now, just a little fun. All of our instruments, we like to have a little fun. We always include what we call an Easter egg. It's a hidden, something hidden on the organ console graphics on screen, and the mystery is how do you find it and activate it, and what is it? So, just for fun today, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I'm going to have everyone put their finger on their screen right where my mouse cursor is, at the bottom of the music rack. And, oh yes, thank you. I saw that. Let's switch back. Good thing I read the comment. Sorry. So everyone put their finger on the screen. 3, 2, 1. And the Easter egg appears. So just a little fun fact. Most of the instruments out there have some things like this. All right, so we're going to go away from Schnicker now. And we're going to actually get in the virtual airplane and fly to France. I don't want to save that registration. Now imagine if a flight went this fast from Germany to France. I mean, they're neighboring countries, but you can't get there this quick. So here we've got a Cavaille Cole organ from Metz, France. Now, something that, again, talking about before, you don't really appreciate the music that was written at the time period for these organs until you hear the organ. So Caesar Franck, he was very close with Cavaille Cole and actually toured around promoting his organs, playing concerts on his organs, and had that sound in mind when he was composing. So I know here in the States, it's hard to find a really authentic French-sounding organ. And we do our best to simulate it, with the selection of reeds that we do and the fons and everything. But it's really something when you hear a piece played on the actual organ and when you can play it yourself. Just, some stuff. And even the reeds on the receipt, when you close the expression, they're there, but it's so subtle, it almost sounds like just the foundations are on. So here's, we're going to do a little Franck piece or a week, so I'm going to play just the opening chord. So you can hear open box, closed box. Okay, so I can't play that piece anymore, so I've got a file that I'm going to play because it's a little better than what I would do. Where did it go? Oh, let's go to recording. Yes, here a week. And we're going to listen to some of these sounds here. I'm going to make this full view here for you. Now it's going to build up to a much fuller sound. We're going to change registrations. More reeds and plenum. We'll cut it there. So sounds pretty authentic. Just in case anyone's wondering, I'm sitting here in my studio at home and I'm playing on just a single little MIDI keyboard. I mean, there's nothing like getting that sound in your home. So some other interesting things that you're going to learn about with different builders, in this case Cavaillé Cole, his use of the combinaisons, maybe the S is silent, combinaison. And this is a pretty cool development at the time. So let's get rid of these and the receipt. We're going to just show how these things work, which at the time, now we're used to presets, pistons, toe studs, and we can pretty much do anything we want. But back then, they didn't have that technology. So here, if you notice, I've got the reeds on the grand org pull, but you're not hearing the reeds and the upper work. You can't hear those until you activate this coupler. So this is great because you can basically preset registrations without them coming on, and when you're ready, you kick that foot pedal down or off and change your sounds. So really, really pretty neat. So one of the other things I just wanted to show you in this particular organ that I think is really great sound, it's one of my favorite stops, is the voix humaine, the tremolo. Well, let's do it first without the trem. Let's get all the couplers on. very thin, fragile sounding reed, but I think it's lovely. Now we'll add the tremulant. So these are the type of things that Halper can really help you learn. And, there's much more than that, but we've got limited time today. So those are some of the few things I wanted to show you. Before we open up for some questions and answers, I just wanted to say we are offering everyone watching a discount if you're interested in getting Halperk. So look at your screen, use that coupon code AGYO Live 2025. Enter that when you check out, and you can get 20% off Halperk. I think that pretty much wraps it up. I think we're getting around our time there. So if anyone's got any questions, be glad to answer those for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really awesome to be
Yeah, you're
able to
welcome.
witness all of that. Great job. Anybody have any questions? Feel free to either raise your hand or add them in the chat here. I know one of the questions I have is, how big is this library of different organs? Like, how many can you really experience with this?
Yeah, there's a lot. There's developers for Halperk around the world. We've been doing this for over 20 years now. So there is roughly, I would guess, maybe 250 to 300 different organs representing most different style periods, genres of music. There's even some Italian and Spanish organs, which you don't really spend too much time on the literature or getting to play because they're pretty rare. But Halperk offers those as well. You can even get some harpsichords. There's a few of those. We have one that I recorded back when I was at college, Willard Martin harpsichord. So, there's definitely no shortage of good instruments.
Great. We have a question here that is from Bridget. What do you think is the most common usage of this? Education, personal use, etc. What do you think?
Yeah, great question. I believe the most common use is for practice by organists at home. There's plenty of public installations, church installations, concert halls, theaters. But for home practice, it is, that's the most popular use. It's actually been used in the movies too. There's a couple films out there. The first one it was used in is called Frankenweenie, if anyone's seen that, by Tim Burton. There's a couple scenes, a graveyard scene and a little fair scene where they play the organ, and it's one of ours, the Gottfried Silbermann organ in Germany. And then Interstellar is the other one with Hans Zimmer, where they used Salisbury Cathedral organ that we sampled for some of the movie, and they used real recordings of another English cathedral organ. So there's all ways to use it, but most of it is just for home practice.
Great. We have another question here, which is, what are the best or more successful computers for this?
Sure. Well, there's both Mac and Windows computers are great. It really depends on what you're familiar with and what you prefer user interface wise. Current day computers, pretty much any of them are going to be suitable for Halperk. What the ultimate thing that matters is you need to figure out which organs you're going to want to play. If you ultimately think you're going to have really, really large cathedral organs with long reverb, then you're going to want a more powerful computer with more processor power, more RAM memory, just to handle that. But these little demos I did today, I did on a MacBook Pro laptop. It's a few years old, but it's not anything maxed out, and it handles everything just fine. Halperk is always updated when we offer updates to be compatible with the latest hardware and optimized so things run fast and smoothly. So, and we have tech support on call here. So if you ever have a question about getting a computer, just go to our website at halperk.com, click the support menu, and you can drop us an email. We'll be happy to help you configure a computer.
Great. I have a question as well. Being that you're so immersed in this, what do you find to be your favorite part of all of this? What do you find to be the most engaging piece of this technology?
Yeah, that's actually another great question. And this is something that I've known for a long time. Um, it's when you go to record an organ, there's a lot of work involved. There's traveling, packing up your gear, flying, getting it set up, driving, and spending the time sampling the organ, which is in itself a little grueling at times. Then you got to bring it all back, get it on your computer, do the processing, the audio editing, the graphics, the programming, and that's a lot of work. Sometimes another year more of work. So to answer your question, once it's all done and you release the product for the customers, the public to use and buy, and they get their hands on it and they start making music and they're uploading demos and you hear it, it's for me a really great satisfying feeling to hear other people making music out of the work that we do just to bring them, these sampled sounds. So, the fact that we can inspire other people and help them practice and perform and get to know these organs, that they may otherwise not get to, I think is a really satisfying feeling.
Thank you for sharing that. We have another question here, which is, do you have any recommendations for Baroque Hopwork sample sets, such as Silverman, or what do you think?
Yeah, there's definitely no shortage. There's a lot to choose from there. We ourselves, our company, have three. We've got two Gottfried Silbermann. We've got the Arp Schnicker that we just listened to, and there's plenty of others out there from other producers. On our website, if under the Learn More heading up top, if you click on Instruments, we have a database. It probably doesn't have all the latest releases. We need to do some updates there, but you can sort by organ builder or developer, or time period, Baroque, and that's going to show you all the instruments that are available. So, as far as recommending one, again, it really depends on your own personal preference. Music is pretty subjective, so you might listen to one recording or another and like the way it sounds better, or it's just the organ itself. Some of the recordings, the sampling that's done are a little closer to the pipes from certain people, and others are a little bit more distant and have more of the church acoustics. So that's a factor to keep in mind when you're shopping for an organ. If you're doing home practice, I would suggest something a little bit more present, like you're sitting under it so you can get a good feel and have, that immediate response from the pipes. So, but yeah.
Great. All right. And one last question from, I think, for myself here, unless anybody else has anything that you'd like to add. You mentioned about using this as a educational resource. I know for some people, if they've never used anything of this sorts, it can be kind of intimidating to first start the process. So where would you recommend they start at to really kind of explore this and get involved in it?
Yeah, well, the first thing would be, get on your computer, and we have a 2-week trial. You can download the software for free. Try it out, make sure everything works. Then you can get more involved. The basics of Halpert are pretty simple. We have instructional guides and a user guide on how to set up your hardware, your keyboards, and your organ console to map it to the software to play it in real time. And it couldn't be more simple. We can actually go over that tomorrow's lecture. We'll have some time so we can talk about the setup there. But yeah, and the user manual is very thorough. And again, we have tech support here so we can answer questions via email. But the first step would be download it, install it, load it up. It comes with a free organ. It's an English romantic organ with 30 stops. So that's what the download size actually consists of. Halpert itself is not that big, but it comes bundled with the organ. So you can get started right away playing around. And if you don't have a keyboard, you can use your mouse and click the keys, just to hear sounds and make sure everything's working. So I would suggest starting that way.
Great. And I just see we got one more question in here.
Sure.
Oh, two more. Is there any function in the software to monitor the volume, such as to protect hearing health?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Let's go back to the screen here. So if we go to our settings here under engine, the first thing you see is a volume control. And you can actually hook this up to your keyboards. Let's go back here. So I've got this slider here. So I go up and down. So I'm going to show you actually now what we just talked about. I right click on the control and I click auto detect. Then I move my control. I want to control it. I click done. Apparently I already had that mapped. Let's do this. Now I can do this. Oh, you can't see my screen. Sorry. Let's go back. So now, sorry, let's get back to this one. Now, so you can see my fingers controlling the volume up and down. So yeah, it's very simple. Then there's also the trim buttons for even further reduction if you need to do volume.
Great. And last question here is, can you incorporate hopped work into the pipe organ?
Yes, for sure. And that's done very widely throughout the world. Hybrid organs or with another digital organ. Halpert actually has lots of features in it to allow it to be used along with real pipe work. And probably one of the most fascinating things that it offers is temperature and humidity settings adjustments. We don't offer the hardware. It does require a separate hardware box that will monitor, the humidity and the temperature of the room, and that can actually be connected to the pitch function in Halpert that we looked at earlier, and raise or lower the pitch depending on the external factors, and it should match real pipe work. But if your pipe organ stops send MIDI message outputs, then that can be used to control the organ, so you can play a real stop of pipes along with the virtual stop, or disable one or the other. So yeah, there's lots of options for compatibility with incorporating into real pipes.
Great. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for enlightening us all about this. And I'll encourage everybody, we're having a part 2 of this presentation tomorrow. So feel free to join in then. And if you have any other questions, you'll have another chance to bring some of those up. Thank you so much, Brett.
Hey, thank you, Michelle. Thanks, everyone, and hope to see you tomorrow.
Right. So now I will ask, we're going to have a bit of a discussion panel here, and I will recommend for everyone that the best viewing options will be multi-speaker mode. So if you want to set that up now, that'll be easiest to view our panelists. We will have 3. One will be joining us in a bit here, but we'll get started with who's here. So this presentation and discussion will be about alternative career paths for organists. I know when I started as an organist, I had no idea what there really was besides, like, yeah, I could play at a church. I guess I've been doing that. And then it was kind of like, well, is there other things out there? How do I do that? How do I get engaged in that? How do I find other people that have to do with that? So we have 3 speakers that'll be here. First, we have Faith Freeze, who's going to talk to us about education. We have Soul with us, who's going to talk to us about organ tech. And David Hurd, who's going to join in a little bit here, who's going to talk to us about some competitions. So welcome to you all. I'm going to start with you, Faith, if you'd like to just kind of talk a little bit about where you're at, what you're doing, who you are, anything like that would be great.
Well, I'm up in the Rocky Mountains these days, and I retired from the University of Alabama in 2020. And so my day consists of, I ski in the morning and I practice in the afternoon. So that's kind of what I'm doing now.
How did you when you were involved in education directly, how did you start in that little path?
Okay, well, do you want me to go through all the questions that you asked on the sheet? That kind of,
Sure.
because
Yeah,
I
we can
kind of
start there.
prepared. Okay, I kind of prepared something. I can tell you from the outset, I was a pianist first, and I studied. I loved the piano, I guess. I was pretty young. I started at 8 years old, and I got bored. My piano teacher, I wanted to play Rachmaninoff, and she wouldn't let me. And so I'd go home and play it. But I really wanted to study that. And I was about, I think, 8th grade by that time. And I'd had a bad experience with memory and such on a recital. And so my mother, I was just quickly losing interest and getting bored and tired of taking piano lessons. And so she switched me over to Mrs. Abram Hay, who lived a block from our house. She was an Oberlin graduate. And this was back in the 60s. So, it's been a while. But anyway, I never looked back. And I learned on a Hammond B3 organ, but practiced at our Lutheran church. And my parents bought me a Wurlitzer organ, a tube organ. It was just like, you could practice at home in your pajamas. And so anyway, that's how I kind of got started. But my first degree was in home economics, which is really funny since I prefer that my husband cook. Anyway, so I did prepare, you asked some questions about education, performance, and pedagogy. And one of the roles of pedagogy, or the method of teaching, is to create a healthy keyboard technique from the beginning. I don't know how many students I've had to rework their technique because they had a terrible teacher that let them play like this. It was just tendonitis waiting to happen. And a good piano technique in the early years really aids in a healthy organ technique. And a healthy pedal technique is just as important. A good method of teaching helps the student create good habits and helps the student express him or herself musically. The teacher serves as an example, hopefully, when they play. And that also they also teach, their teaching serves as an example too. And what I guess I'm trying to say is that a poor technique gets in the way of making beautiful music. Curriculum development, you asked about that. In organ pedagogy, that should include evaluation of various manual and pedal method books. My students at UA had to go through like 30 of them and evaluate them and the strengths and the weaknesses. They would do practice teaching. I'd give them, students to practice teach, and I would observe and evaluate those. They would evaluate me teaching and observe and write up, little reviews. There's also an evaluation of the repertoire that's appropriate for various levels of students. Oh, and one of my favorite things is making sure that teaching how to play hymns is on the curriculum. I remember an Indiana University student, she got the PC, the performer's certificate. And I had her come and play at the church. She was subbing for me and she could not play a hymn. I thought that was pretty sad. So I kept asking her back so she'd learn. And the last thing is technique, technique, technique. I have a saying that my students know, and I was just talking to Christopher Henley yesterday, and he ripped this right off. He goes, "This is my little quote. You're welcome to borrow it. Technique is a straitjacket that sets you free. It will definitely free you up to play absolutely anything. I believe it. Of course, you got to practice." Then you asked about recruitment and retention. So of course we got the POEs, the pedals, pipes, and pizza. We've all gone to them. We've all either staffed them or we've gone to them as students, whatever. And those are really helpful to recruit. One of the best ways, of course, you probably have all done this, if you play in church and you invite little children to come up, and if they take piano, they can put their piano piece on the organ. This is after church, not during. But they'll play, and if they don't have a piano piece, put the chimes on, and they really think that's cool, Or you put the pedals on and they'll kind of walk on them a little bit, but they're so little they won't hurt the pedals. Retention you asked about. Kind of I learned from that Rachmaninoff story. If a student wishes to play a piece that might not be quite within their capability, I always try to help them get through it and nurture that desire, that dream to be able to play a particular piece. Or I talk to the students and I ask them what their goals are. Sometimes, what I'm giving them is not what they expect or need, or, so sometimes that's helpful too, to keep them interested in that fashion. Then let's see, organ performance. Regarding organ performance, in the early years, many of us started playing piano and also organ in Sunday school and church. And I mean, I'm talking when I started, I think I was fourth grade playing piano in Sunday school. And I had to they would holler out the little numbers of the little book that they were using, and I had to sight read it. Well, that's a skill. That's your bread and butter if you can sight read. And then I started playing in church. I think that those are ways that are non-threatening and help students become accustomed to public performance in the early days. In college, of course, we always have a weekly studio performance class, and that should be offered, and students will then play and prepare their pieces to play in that class in front of their colleagues. Students in school, in college, I think they should always be assigned to rehearse and perform collaboratively with other musicians, ensembles, orchestra, and contemporary music ensembles, whatever, and just work collaboratively. I think it's very healthy. And it's a whole other ballpark when you're not in the practice room by your little self, but you're with a group. It's another whole thing. And I'm going to say this twice because I know everybody, I told my mom, I said, when I was in high school, I just want to play the organ. I don't want to, I don't want to do anything else. And she just laughed. And so I'm going to say this. It must be said at this point that making a career solely out of organ performance is rare. Once out of school, you need to pay the monthly bills. And a regular paycheck is the best way to do this. So you should make yourself as marketable as possible. Now, let me say that again. It must be said at this point that making a career solely out of organ performance is rare. You need that regular paycheck to pay the monthly bills. So make yourself marketable. For instance, at Indiana University, my alma mater, with my master's in organ performance, I also had to have a minor in music history, a minor in choral conducting. And I thought, I'm never going to use this, of course. But, I did it because it was required. For my doctorate, I had a double major of organ performance and church music, and another minor in choral conducting, and another minor in music history. And man, I thought, I'll never use those minors, but I did. You find that when you start off teaching, if you go into academia, you're going to start off generally at a little school, nothing too big, because you haven't established yourself, you haven't got a name for yourself. And you'll find that you'll be chief cook and bottle washer. More than likely, you'll begin your careers like I did at my first real full-time was Concordia University in Austin, Texas, which is a small Lutheran college. And I was hired as the organ professor. Great, except for I was teaching organ literature courses, music theory, music history, and I was the director of the 110 voice auditioned Austin Children's Choir that traveled to England to sing in Canterbury. Okay, so organ performance, and yet I was keeping my concert career going. I was still practicing, but I had to do all these other things. And then from Concordia, I moved to become the organist and director of music at Collingwood Presbyterian Church in Toledo, Ohio. I grew the choirs from one sanctuary choir to 2 graded children's choirs, a handbell choir, an orchestra, and I founded and directed the Faith and Performing Arts series. And I'll tell you more about that in a second. And then from Toledo, they did that for about 5 years. Then I went in 2003 to the Alabama School of Music, University of Alabama. I developed a church music undergraduate and graduate curriculum. That I presented to the Alabama State Board of Education because it was weird. I was in the Bible Belt, but they didn't want me making sure I wasn't teaching how to, I don't know, preach and do. I thought it was interesting. But so I had to get approval for that. Courses that I taught in the church music curriculum were hymnody, church music practicum, and clergy-musician relationships. And I taught the four, count them, lit, organ lit classes. There were 4 of those, and organ pedagogy, as well as the weekly applied organ lessons. Now, so from Indiana University, where I had to do all, take all those minors and stuff, I'm doing a lot more than just playing the organ. And yet I was still concertizing too. My whole point for explaining my life journey is to say a person never really knows where she or he may end up. Be prepared, make yourself marketable. Back to Toledo, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about that. The Faith and Performing Arts series. Collingwood Presbyterian Church had a history. It was built in 1920s by a pastor who had a great vision. His name was R. Lincoln Long, and he wanted to make the church a cultural and religious center, and it's still located in the largest historical district east of the Mississippi River. It's called the Old West End. So you know it, right? Yeah, they have a Holt camp. It's kind of nasty, but whatever. Anyway, and it takes up an entire city block. It's huge. And what R. Lincoln Long did, he put the sanctuary at one end of the block. Then you had all the offices and everything. That was on the second floor. And on the second floor, the other end, you had a huge theater, 609-seat theater. And it was a full working stage. And with the I don't know what kind of lights those are, those big ones, the big stage lights. And you'd had to have a crew to work that stuff. It was a kind of an amazing thing. And it had balcony and anyway, and the third floor was a gymnasium. Basically, our Lincoln Long had a mega church in 1920, and it was probably the first one. The bottom floor was an institutional sized kitchen and a huge fellowship hall. And in the 50s, they were doing Britain's Noah's Flood. I mean, they had a huge music program. In the 60s, they had the Old West End experienced white flight. And they all went out to Sylvania, Ohio, and the church attendance diminished sharply. The theater was in quite a debilitated state. The plaster was falling off the walls, and theater seating was broken. And I was brought in 1993 to rebuild the music program and start the Faith and Performing Arts series, which the objective was to bring in the unchurched. And in a rather non-threatening way. So the Lincoln Long Theater was rehabilitated, and we began to host and engage musical artists, plays, and as well as performances by the Toledo Symphony. We had Meet the Instruments for children with the Toledo Symphony. We hired actors from New York City. We had the world-renowned David Baker jazz cellist from Indiana University come and do a day-long workshop and performance, and on and on and on. But this is when I thought I really should have had an arts administration degree or some sort of coursework. I was flying by the seat of my pants. I was writing grants. I don't know how to write a grant, and I was gaining experience as an arts presenter, and an admin degree would teach you how to manage concerts from the backstage to the box office. You learn how to develop arts through fundraising, grant writing, legal issues in the arts, and you gain firsthand experience through an internship with a local arts organization, perhaps. So instead, I was kind of learning as I went along, which was fine, but still, I could have done probably better. And I think there's a lot of churches out there that are actually kind of in the same boat. They have the type of facilities that can engage this sort of a program and this sort of outreach. And you might end up with a job like that it's a ministry, and your heart has to be in it. Again, the other thing I'll just touch on it is an alternative career path could be teacher certification, and you can get a secondary in organ. So you could teach a lot of my students would do that at UA. So there's that. Again, a person really never knows where he or she will end up. Career-wise, be marketable, widen your parameters of preparation. Always, as the Girl Scout motto says, always be prepared. There you go.
Thank you so much, Faye. Thanks
Yeah,
for that.
sure.
That was great. All right, so we're going to go head over to Seoul now to hear a little bit more about Oregon Tech. And at the end of this, we'll also be asking some questions to all 3 of you. So switching over to Seoul.
All right, thank you so much, and hello everyone. My name is Sol Rosado, and I like to, as some of my colleagues know, um, self-describe as a hot mess express of the organ world. Um, before I begin, a slight bit of background about me. My bachelor's is in two bachelors are in viola performance and organ performance from the University of Oklahoma. I did not start out in either of those majors, but here we are. Um, Master's in organ from the Cleveland Institute of Music with Todd Wilson. Um, I've been full time as an organ technician, uh, equivalent of about 9 years now, which is terrifying to think of. Church musician on and off for most of it. Um, right now, I work for the Muller Pipe Organ Company. We are outside of Columbus, Ohio, in a small town called Croton. Been with them for about 4 years now. Um, Prior to that, I was in a shop, did sort of our residency or internship with Bill Saluzniak in Western Massachusetts. Before that, I was in Norman, Oklahoma with John Reister, the Red River Pipe Organ Company. So sort of all over the place, but some really cool people, really cool spots along the way. Whenever I do a presentation of any sort, I also like to give I call it my secondary bio, which is usually, if I'm doing a PowerPoint, it's usually on the next slide. And the secondary bio that I like to give is when I started in organ tech, I had no idea how to use a drill or a impact driver or a screwdriver or any power tools. I failed piano not once, not twice, but 3 times. Um, I got the only D on my transcript was a class called The History and Fundamentals of Pipe Organ Construction and Design. Um, so all this to say, as Faith, you were saying a second ago, thank God for wonderful and patient teachers, because I would not be where I am today if it weren't for my teachers, and teachers in all the sense of education. So a little bit about just organ tech in general. Similar to education and basically a lot of other aspects of this industry, the organ tech field in and of itself is incredibly just, I would say, like professionally unique, interesting, diverse. Um, a lot of shops, basically each shop is different in terms of its size, in terms of its scope of work, in terms of who works there and what they focus on. Um, the shop I currently work in at Muller, I would say we're split about 50-50 in terms of service work and either new constructions, restorations, rebuild work, that sort of stuff. So when I'm in the shop, I serve as Muller's lead voicer. So I basically work with the pipe work, either new or restored, to determine basically what an instrument's going to sound like. And when I'm out of the shop, I run a team of service technicians. Um, my colleagues are woodworkers, they are business managers, they work on re-leathering, they work on engineering. They are so cool. In terms of a career in organ tech in particular, the cool thing about it is based off of your interests and your skill sets and what you want to learn, or where you want to live is another big thing. You can basically make it look the way you want it to look. So I have a part-time church job right now as well because I wanted to stay involved in church music. And for example, my job does not have a weekly choir rehearsal. I basically just show up on Sundays and play. And I would basically give anything for my congregation of about 75 people in a town outside of Cleveland. And but it works with my organ tech schedule. So I can take a day off of my tech work and basically go be an organist, go be a church musician. The Muller shop, if I'm out, I still play concerts on occasion. The colleagues have been great about letting me go out and play concerts or accompany. So it gives me that flexibility of, as Faith is saying, having a job that is, pays the bills, gives you insurance, tells you, gives you what you need, and then you can make your music career what you want to around that. The best way I would say when it comes to getting into organ tech, because a lot of people are like, how did you end up in this? So I want to say, first and foremost, is like a lot of the stereotypes that come with skilled trades. When I started as an organ technician, I was still very much presenting as female. And especially for women in particular, there I know is a large stigma about, power tools and hands-on work. And so for everyone out there, especially women, like, go for it. You got this. And there will be people, and a lot of people out there, and good people that are there to mentor and help you along the way. And in a shop, so basically there's not, you don't get a degree in this, you don't, have to go through a very like specialized educational program. The best way I would say to get into this is get to know your local organ technician. Either they will likely, actually, I can pretty much guarantee that there will be a job opening or spot to help at least part-time. And what they'll probably have you start doing is going with them out on tunings. And when you're going out on tunings, you'll be assisting, which we call holding keys, which will be helping out a tuner. And from there, you basically just sort of set sail. You can continue in service work, you can move to other shops, you can stay in the same shop, and a good, honest technician will want to develop your skill set and help you grow. With that said, and I know I have a time crunch, but then I'm always, that's something I'll also add, is that at the end, I know there will be questions. Also, you know where I work, so you know how to get a hold of me if you have any other questions about that. There are basically a ton of different areas. So if you're in a shop, you can focus on like the design and construction aspect of the instrument. So I, in particular, when I was studying organ, I loved orchestral transcriptions. I loved the symphonic organ. I loved playing theater organ rep. And so sort of my design scope tends to be based around that, but we also work and build instruments in a variety of styles. This is why your organ literature classes are important. Maintenance and tuning. This is probably the area I am most passionate about. And my particular sort of passion in this area is outreach to churches and small congregations, and especially rural settings, to help maintain and preserve the instrument that they have the best possible, especially with limited funds. So it's an area of research that I'm currently working in, and I'll go out and give presentations to local AGO chapters and local clergy, buildings and grounds managers, basically committee members, talking about how to maintain their instrument, and historical organ preservation. So some shops specialize in historic restoration of instruments of a certain style. So if that's something that is appealing or caters to in particular, that is totally a route you can go as well. The other thing I'll emphasize, especially as organists, and Daniel, please feel free to laugh at me about this, because this is definitely something that came up in school, is no matter what your role is, if you are in the organ world in some way, whether it's part-time, if it's full-time, if it's teaching, if it's on a music committee, if it's with a choir or an orchestra, you are going to end up inadvertently as an organ consultant in some way or another. So the number one thing I could say is, and there aren't a ton of resources out there, but we're working on this, get to know the basics of how your instrument works. Get to know where stuff is, get to know what the parts are, get to know who the previous technicians and manufacturers are. And the other thing I could basically add, especially as a service person, is when you're consulting places for major work on the organ, um, get multiple bids, and a good, honest technician will always be willing and want to answer your questions. So no matter who you are or in which area, if you have a technician that is available to say, oh, this is why we're doing this, or this is why we use this method, or how can we work with you to work on this specific, design or your church's needs or something, they will always be available to answer your questions. So I can talk more about this in the Q&A section because I know there's going to be a lot of specifics, but when it comes to organ tech, get to know your local people, and basically there's no wrong way to do it. So
Thank you. That was awesome. Now I'll switch over to David Hurd for another perspective about another type of career path.
Good evening. I apologize for being late to get in. I had a little argument with my computer, but it finally let me through, and so here I am. And much of what I have to say will have echoes, I think, of what you heard from Faith to a great degree, because this whole idea of being diverse, of having a broad range of skills, is really quite key to this field. I'm amused by the title, Alternative Career Paths for Organists. And the question I raise would be, alternative to what? It seems to me that to some degree, they're all are alternatives, and that is what comprises the field. And historically, if we look at organists, they have always been multitaskers. Through all we know about the history of the great organists, they all did a number of things. Bach played the viola and taught Latin, and it goes on and on. Performers, obviously, on organ and other instruments, singers, teachers of music and other disciplines, conductors, composers, arrangers, editors, and publishers, clergy, uh, church musicians. That's the grab bag of all the above. And if we want to talk about church music, I mean, all of those other categories somehow are folded in to the mix. It's interesting to me when I think back that when I did my undergraduate organ performance degree, obviously I thought I was going to be an organist, and I expected I was probably going to play in church. And of course, this was 100 years ago when I did that. But churches were different in those days. Lots has happened in the culture of public religion since that time. But there were voices that were warning me all along. Well, you can't depend entirely for your living on playing in church. And I thought, well, of course, the other thing that I experienced was organ in academe. And of course, anybody who went to Oberlin wanted to come back and teach there. So I kind of thought, well, obviously I'll want to teach someplace. So I'll be in a church, and I'll be in a school, and I'll play recitals, and very neat. But somehow doing an undergraduate performance degree doesn't necessarily take into account all the things that go into even those things, because there are all sorts of auxiliary skills, and sensitivities and opportunities for musical growth and for enjoyment as well as making money along the way. And so the taking the sacred music aspect of things, sacred music direction. Well, I have to admit that I have never been a temple organist. I have never had a regular position in a Jewish synagogue. I've played lots of funerals at Temple Emmanuel in New York because I was free on Sundays a lot and at various points, and so I was very much in demand for Sunday funerals at Temple Emmanuel. But as far as Sabbath day services, I have not had that experience. I'm a cradle Episcopalian. And so I sort of grew up and was hardwired for a certain kind of uh, church. And I have been kind of lucky in a way that in my career that has been a thread that has been very consistent. I have worked mostly in Episcopal churches. I taught for 39 years at what was at that time the flagship seminary of the Episcopal Church, General Theological Seminary in New York. And most priests spend 3 years in seminary. I spent 13 times 3 years in seminary and was never ordained. There you have it. But the point is that that experience was a very rich experience because I had the combination of academe and religion and church. And I'm very grateful for the amount of liturgical knowledge that I was able to glean from my colleagues, the amount of theology and liturgical knowledge that I had to acquire to do that work, which I never really quite planned. I had thought at some earlier time in my life going to seminary myself, but I didn't quite anticipate it was going to happen that way. And so again, the interesting thing is that sometimes we go to school and we get degrees and certified in certain skills, certain area, and that's how we self-identify. But in fact, as soon as we are out in the world, we craft our own jobs. We craft our own identities that by necessity take us beyond the definitions of what our major was on our degree certificate. And so it didn't occur to me that I would spend so much of my time and energy composing. But again, the church work at the time that I was drawn into working with Larry King at Trinity Church Wall Street when prayer books were new and there were lots of new words that need to be set to music and Larry and people like Calvin Hampton were across town and they were writing new music for their congregations and I thought, well, I can do that too. And so I now I'm sort of segueing into the composition part of my talk. And it was I was always interested in writing music. I was always interested in music theory. I was always interested in how pieces held together. And I was fortunate to have teachers in my early experience of piano lessons who taught me form and analysis. And the basis of sonata form and taught me harmonies and the chord progressions and had me analyzing and putting Roman numerals on my Clementi sonatinas and it was really wonderful and that some kids hate music theory. I had teachers who made it wonderful and I loved it. And so uh, it was a natural progression to go from analyzing music that existed already to wanting to construct my own. And so I made up tunes and I improvised. And long before I knew what that was, I would love to sit at the piano and play. And that was not particularly encouraged when I was an undergraduate. Now they teach improvisation in a lot of schools that didn't encourage it 50 years ago, but that's another topic. At any rate, I've always thought of composition as like the final frontier of musicianship. That, what we learn so much about music from the music that we play. every piece of music we play or hear teaches us something about the art form. And at some point, uh, many of us find that we want to give back, and we have ideas of our own. And there are three principal reasons for composing. One is creativity. One has ideas that one wishes to write down. One is need. There's a need for a particular kind of piece that doesn't exist, and so one has to produce it. And the third is commissions. Somebody asks you to write something, and usually one doesn't get commissioned until one has already demonstrated one can compose. So, but one of the greatest honors in the world, I think, is to be asked to write a piece of music, to be entrusted with the creation of a new piece of art. There's already so much music in the world, and if no new music were ever created, we'd still have plenty. But um, today we are producing the music for the future, and if Bach thought that there was enough music in the world and figured he didn't have to write, what we wouldn't have any number of wonderful pieces of music. So if you feel like you want to go out into that frontier, um, all your knowledge of music that you have acquired, whether or not you have specifically studied composition. My own composition studies have been a fairly small amount of my academic work, but they have been entirely my life in music. And every time I play a piece of music, I'm learning about writing music, and on it goes. And I think I've probably run close to the end of my time. I'll leave it there. There's so much more to be said, but there we are. Thank you.
Thank you all. That was so great to kind of just get a brief glimpse of all of the different things that make up what your career has become over the years. So we're on our Q&A part. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to add them in the chat. I'm going to get us started with some, and then I'll bring up others as they come. So in your various careers, how much do you think that advocating for the organ plays a part in what you do? Soul, do you want to? I see you shaking head. Do you want to start?
Oh, sure. Every minute of every day. Um, every minute of every day, and in so many different ways. I feel especially fortunate as an organ technician to be able to see so many different instruments in so many different capacities in every sense of the instrument. And in, I'd say probably the majority of our clients, the organists are part-time musicians of some aspect in a variety of backgrounds. Um, some of our service clients have had no previous experience with the pipe organ, and they just kind of are at the neighborhood church and are like, here's an organ, good luck. Some people have come to it in other ways. Some people have degrees in organ, and it's all across the board. But advocating for the instrument, not just in terms of here's how much money you should budget for, maintenance purposes, but also in terms of saying here's what the instrument can do, and here is what you can do with the instrument, and here's how you can involve this instrument in your local community as much as possible. So yeah, I'd say basically every minute of every day.
Faith, I saw that you unmuted too.
Well, yeah, I'm advocating, I guess, quite a bit, even on the ski lift, on the chairlift. I start talking about organ music, and people probably avoid sitting with me. But something that happened after my, the San Francisco, I had the whale thing. I don't know if anybody went, but they saw the whales and I played counterpoint to that. So anyway, so the Denver AGO chapter got me to, they wanted to have a concert that would appeal to youth. And somebody told them, and I think it was somebody on our board who happened to be like, you know, a younger person, and they said, "Oh, I heard the organ playing Interstellar, the movie." And so that's one thing. You always got to keep an open mind about stuff like this, I guess. So they got me to play. It's coming up March 21st, and I don't know if Bach is spinning in his grave because that's the 21st, and we're starting off with the movie music from Interstellar, and hopefully they'll have youth there, and it's cool. They're going to put this is why the whale thing. They're going to put up pictures that NASA actually had. I guess NASA was part of that, getting the movie, the black hole, that part of the movie. And so there's going to be NASA pictures of planets on a screen while I play Anna Lapwood's suite for Interstellar. In some ways, so that's kind of advocating for the organ for an audience. Not necessarily to buy an organ, but to have an audience to play to, you know. So I do some of that, and multimedia is a way I think that kind of crosses that or bridges that gap of trying to get people interested, you know. So
Yeah, thank you.
yeah.
David, what are your thoughts on this?
Uh, I think that I try to think that I'm advocating for the organ every time I sit down to play. I do not take for granted a church service as just, you know, a church service. I mean, every time, every note, every stanza, every hymn, every registration, every prelude, every postlude, every hymn accompaniment, to make it work, to be fully present musically. It sometimes distresses me that some really very fine organists will play gorgeous preludes and postludes and will not play the service well. um, but I want to make people love singing with the organ. I want to make them love hearing the organ and the choir sing together. And so I think that apart from advocating in playing recitals and in composing, I think that every moment of music in a church service, the organ was the first. My first hearing of the organ was in church. I thought that was as a small child, the first live music I ever heard was in church. It was the organ. So it's been very special to me, and so I think that those of us who play the organ for worshiping communities have a special opportunity to advocate very consciously and very deliberately.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate the different perspectives on that as well. Our next question comes from Bridget. And just so you all know, I'll kind of jump around who I ask what, just so we keep rotating. Bridget asked, what's been the most unexpected career shift thus far? And how did you decide to take that leap? So if it's okay with you all, I'm going to start with Faith on this one.
Probably when I switched from teaching vocational careers in sixth, seventh, and eighth graders in northern Indiana, and I started studying for my. I only had a minor in music in organ, and at that point, I was pretty young. I think I was about like 21, 22, and so I was teaching, you know, little sixth grade boys how to make neckties and how to cook we had, like, I remember 8 kitchens in the home ec department, 8 kitchens, 8 class periods, and I had to try 64 peanut butter cookies. To this day, I can't eat one. And at that same time, I started driving to Valparaiso University to study with Phil Gearing so I could get into Indiana University. And they called me a special student because I didn't have the undergrad degree and it was going for a master's. So that would be, you know, kind of a switch, you know. So, yeah.
Thank you. David?
Um, my professional life has sort of gone kind of in one direction pretty much. Although I have to say that when I first was invited to teach church music at General Seminary, that was kind of a decision that shifted the focus for me from being a keyboard player to being a classroom teacher. And of course, my responsibilities at the seminary included a lot of playing of the organ, but it was all contextualized in theological education. And I was working not with musicians, not with people who were planning to have a music career, that sort of teaching I had planned to do, but rather I was going to be teaching people who were largely going to be the supervisors of organists who were going to be clergy in churches. And so that was kind of a flip of what I expected to do, even though I was doing pretty much what I had been trained to do in a certain sort of way, but the emphasis was totally different. And instead of teaching the musicians, I was teaching the people who were going to be the administrators of the musicians. And so it was kind of an interesting thing. And I thought it would last for a couple of years, then I'd go on to do something a little different. And I did, but it was like 4 decades later. So
That's great. And Sol, what do you think?
So it's been a wild ride. Um, I began my undergrad with the intention of being a meteorologist and having a career with the National Weather Service. Um, and I needed an extra college credit and decided that secondary organ lessons might be a cool idea. Um, and sort of went from there. Aside from the initial shift, I'd say probably at the end of my master's degree, um, I was, looking for where I was going to settle, what I was going to do for work. And I remember having the option of, thankfully, either a full-time church job or continuing full-time as an organ builder. And I remember wrestling with that quite a bit. And for me in particular, it's a combination of because I won't really want to jump right away. I usually will get nervous and think about a bunch of different things at once. But for me, it was the combination of having a shop that was supportive of me continuing as a musician in many different capacities, um, being able to use musical skills in a different way, but also I am someone that doesn't like to be in the same place at the same time always. So looking back on it, I think it's definitely something I would do again, but I can say, especially at the time, I was very nervous. But I think the supportive people made all the difference.
Thank you all. And I very much relate to this. I know I'm the newly appointed director of education for AGO, but when I started, I was a music therapist and pianist. Did not do anything with organ, said I was never, ever, ever going to teach. That is words that I later changed. So I very much relate to what you're all saying. It's amazing what comes up as life goes on. We have another question here, which is for Michael. What are jobs related to organ and music that are good paying? How do you sustain yourself? Want to start with Soul again?
It says me who's looking at the tax forms that are on my table that still need to be completed. Um, a lot of it, I think, depends on what your needs are and what your living needs are. Um, the the big thing I would look for is like as both Faith and David were saying, something that is at least sustainable, where you have enough like professional diversity where like, okay, I at least know from this place that I will get paid for doing this, in whatever context that is. Um, if you become an organ tech, I can guarantee you wherever you live, a local organ technician is hiring. Um, we are in a huge, huge need in this field, especially in service and maintenance work. Um, and the starting pay regionally is not bad at all. So it's a field where I mean, you're not going to be super rich by any means, but it's a good job if you need to just do well and support yourself. And you know, if insurance is something that you need and is important to you, you can usually get like insurance and retirement benefits and you know, adulty things.
David, what are your thoughts?
The church landscape is very, very, very diverse. And the number of full-time church positions probably has decreased in recent years. And which I think is the reason why I think we have all sort of urged you to be um, to have multi skills and to be enterprising about using them because to some degree, I mean, I know some folks have church positions where they are also parish administrator and they work in the same place, but they do more than one job. And some of the job may not be musical at all. Sometimes it's related. For example, if you are the person who actually does the bulletin, if it happens to have music in it, that's a kind of a helpful thing because then the music will be right in the bulletin. So there, I mean, there are church positions that have other aspects that one can sort of combine the music line with another. I mean, even sexton work, sometimes related to music. But I think that as one who has had an academic job and a church job mostly at the same time, sometimes both in church music, I think it's good to have something that's not dependent entirely upon the church, just as a balance for life and for security.
Faith, what do you think?
Unmute. There we go. Yeah. Luckily, like Collingwood Presbyterian, you know, at the time it was pretty, even though the congregation had diminished somewhat, it was, you know, pretty good paying with benefits and the 501(k)s and all that. And it was quite nice. And academia too. You know, Alabama, oh, Concordia was fine. I don't think you were going to get rich, but like Sol says, you know, you live comfortably, you have food on the table, a roof over your head, and you know, Alabama was fine. The salaries and so forth. Um, you know, and then if you go out and play concerts, of course you get paid for them, and that's extra if you know if you really play at good places. You know, I don't know. It's just the diversity that you have to have. There's always seems to be there's something coming in, and it makes life, you know, comfortable anyway.
Great. We have some individual questions here. I'll start with David's question from Adam. Do you have any suggestions for someone who wants to try their hand at as being a composer, at composing?
Well, I think that, you know, composing is one of those things that one to some extent learns by doing, um, but also having some, uh, I suppose, mentor certainly helps. And it's sometimes the mentor might not necessarily be a person who themselves is a composer, but a musician to critique your work. I think that once one has basic skills and knowledge of rhythmic things and harmonic things and melodic things and ideas, then the next step is putting them down on paper and you know, and then sharing them with someone who can offer critique or just response. Um, uh, and I think one could seek out, however, a teacher to be a guide through that process. I have a student right now who is trying his hand at composition, and I'm trying to sort of guide him along the way in terms of uh, where I think there are particular things he should be thinking about, or that he could be incorporating in his thinking as he writes music. And many of us in church music, for example, I wrote for my choirs because I knew who they were and I knew what they could do, and so they put me through, or I put them through my experimentation, and they taught me what worked, and so. Church musicians oftentimes have that opportunity to try things and and take advantage of that. Take the leap.
Well, thank you all. We're just about out of time here, and I see we have some other questions. So you feel free to reach out. We can connect you with anyone on the panel here if you have specific questions for them. But I just want to thank all three of you for such valuable insights in having this conversation today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, up next, we have Lindsay Johnson with her presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to her.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. So glad to be here. Let me make sure that I can share my screen here. Fantastic. Okay. I'm excited to share with you about branding in the arts, models, and methods. And you might be wondering, why should branding matter to me? And I wanted to share a little story that actually happened to me just 2 days ago on Wednesday. So I just recently got a new church job in Scottsdale, very excited, and haven't been there very long, but I went to rehearsal last night, and several choir members congratulated me on the news article that they read in the Scottsdale Progress. And I thought, I didn't put anything out. I have no idea how that got there. Well, I was forwarded the news article, and as I was reading through it, I, recognized things that I had written and things that I'd said, but things I had posted to my Facebook. For example, the highlighted words, "I'm ready to tackle the next chapter in my academic journey, and I'm ecstatic to work with the amazing ASU musicology faculty." That was the pinned caption of my post on Facebook. And there were so many other things in here about being pre-med concentration that was a million years ago in undergrad. Even the picture I didn't give to anybody or give permission. It was just taken from my Facebook or Instagram. I'm not really sure where any of this information came from. And quite honestly, I was just glad that, the information they got was mostly right, and that they chose a decent looking picture. But why branding should matter to us is because if you have an online presence, you already have a brand, whether or not you recognize that. And we should be more intentional about branding because it allows us to be in control of our public image. It allows us to put our best foot forward. Basically, our online presence now is a resume of sorts. It's what people see when they look you up, when they find your LinkedIn, when they look you up on YouTube. And so making sure that we are crafting an image that resonates with our professional goals and aspirations, but also with who we are personally, is very important. So I wanted to share a little bit about who I am before we jump into all of this, and why I feel I want to share this as as an inspiration to others. But before I really endeavor to pursue organ and all of the wonderful things I'm doing with musicology, I came to Arizona with this plan to study organ, and I ended up bringing my cat, and we started hiking together in the desert. And over time, we accumulated quite a following. So We started hiking in the fall of 2021, and by 2020, we had gotten 20,000 followers, and it just continued to grow to the point where we were getting brand deals regularly. We had to open up an LLC, we had to open up a bank account, we had to go through all of these legal things, and started creating media kits, working with multiple brands. And in the course of all of this, we sort of fell into influencing, as it were. And I realized that I wanted to be more intentional about what it was I was doing and the challenges that I was facing, and I wanted to understanding a little better. So I started taking a couple courses in basically social media influencing, and I learned a lot. It was all pretty much directed to pet influencing because that's what I was doing with my cat, but I decided to apply some of those techniques and ideas to my online presence as a musician and as a scholar. So I wanted to share a couple of those things as we go through this workshop, because what our goals are to encourage creativity as musicians, as individuals, as artists, to develop practical tools for using media and ways that we can increase our public image, and then aligning our personal values with our professional goals through this sort of cohesive branding idea. And throughout the session, I may ask you for things that you are interested in or some of your own aspirations, and feel free to drop that in the chat, and I'd love to see some of that. I know that some of our moderators will also be looking at that, and hopefully that can help us develop ideas and chat a little bit more about this deeply. So the first thing that we want to do as we are preparing for sort of intentionalizing our online presence is defining our purpose. So determining why you want to start creating intentional content is important. So is it for fun? Is it to raise awareness for a cause? Is it to craft just your public persona? Are you just creating an online resume, like a virtual resume? Or is it a variety of these things? Knowing your purpose can really shape your goals. So once that is figured out, defining our objectives. So we want to be clear about what we're looking to achieve over the next, for example, year. We're still pretty early on in the year. If you wanted to set a New Year's resolution for one of these goals, you could certainly do that. So for example, getting a certain number of followers, increasing engagement, or more likely getting invited to performance opportunities, for composing opportunities, any kind of networking. It happens so frequently now online and in the virtual world. So if you're thinking about these things and if you're already aware of one of your purposes or your goals, go ahead and jot that down or drop it in the chat, and we'll probably refer back to this as we go along and ask questions about how this aligns with our goals and how we can sort of track into this plan of action for our public image. So defining a self-brand. So the reasons why we do this, as I mentioned, it helps us stand out, it attracts opportunities, expands our influence, establishes an identity that we can control. And a lot of this comes from our public image. And for a lot of us, we're not out here making a ton of content. Most of us are students, we've got a busy schedule, but a visual perception of who we are online is still very important. And having that visual aesthetic, I chose a couple of my favorite Instagram content creators. And if you're thinking right now about who it is that you follow, think about what qualities it is about them that you like. Is it the fact that you can always expect the same kind of content or different kind of content? Is it because their videos are aesthetically pleasing, or is it because they're really engaging, they're bringing new information? These are some of my favorite music creators. Of course, Anna Lapwood, we are all probably familiar with who she is and what she does, specifically in the world of organ. Sav plays piano. She's a BYU student who basically follows along in her day-to-day journey as a student with her practice schedule, her routine. And then Grace Yurchuk, she just graduated from BYU, and she's currently writing a Julius Caesar musical. And she's kind of documenting the process of her as a composer writing this musical. And all of these are really different ideas that have cohesively created a really unique personal identity online. So if you're thinking right now about one of your favorite Instagram accounts, what it is that you like about them, keep that in mind or jot that down so that you can come back to it and think, what is it about this that I like? And is there a way that I can emulate that in my own online presence? So going back to the visual aesthetic, a lot of these accounts, what they do is they follow a certain cohesive idea, right? They have a similar color, they have a similar font or logo scheme. And so when I started working on this sort of like self-branding process, I went on Canva. If you're familiar with Canva, Canva is a really great tool that allows you to be as creative digitally as you want, with a lot of different designs that you can edit and modify in a million different ways. But if you go on Canva and search brand board, it gives you this option to create a sort of palette, a mood board of what it is that you're aiming to provide visually to your audience or to your future collaborators. And then with that idea already in mind, your brand board, you can then apply that consistently throughout your platform. That includes your Facebook profile, your Instagram profile, your online website if you've got one, your YouTube channel. All of these can now have sort of a cohesive idea based on the fact that we've created this brand board. So I'm just going to show a couple of examples. Before we get to the brand board, I wanted to share a little bit more back to my early stages of content creating and influencing. I recognized that a lot of the pictures and videos I was taking of my cat had a really consistent color scheme. As you can see here, pretty much every picture I have has orange and blue and black because my cat is black. And I added the green because I thought it was a nice little add of color pop. And so with this color palette, I pretty much used it as the tools for our logo and for all of the other things that we sort of created as our cohesive image online. And if you're thinking this is crazy, that's only because you take these kinds of pictures or you lived somewhere where there was a lot of orange, like the desert of Arizona, which is true, I will say. Where I lived had a big part to play in the color scheme here. Looking at Anna Lapwood, for example, if you look at the color scheme of the majority of her pictures, she frequently has a set of colors that we kind of associate with Royal Albert Hall or with her own public TikTok performances, because of the way that the lights are changing in the room, or because of her headshots, or because of her outfit with the sparkles and the red. And so it's very possible to create this cohesive idea just based on your pictures. So when I started working on this, I created it for myself and I thought this is great. And I asked a couple of my friends if I could do something similar for them as I practiced, as I worked on this. And I went on Canva and found the brand boards and invited a few friends of mine to submit their own pictures and their own sort of ideas for what they wanted their own brand to look like. And this is what I came up with. So you may recognize a few people on here, but what I did was I got a couple of pictures, I dropped them in, and Canva actually creates a color palette based on the colors that they're finding in your pictures. And so that made it really easy to then create schemes that fit with their online picture presence that was already in place. And so I kind of retroactively created their brand boards based on what they were already doing and sharing. But now they had this sort of idea of what their identity should look like or what it was in line with for their own online presence. And so from the brand boards, they then also got their fonts, they got their logos, and they were able to incorporate that on a large scale of content creating, not just their website or their logo or their signature, but across the board. And that was a really impressive start to thinking about a personal brand and what it means to be an independent creative with an identity online. So as I continued working in this sort of like area, trying to figure out what I was doing, in one of my seminars that I attended, the leader really emphasized choosing a niche. And you might think the organ is already niche enough, but you know what? That in itself may be the problem. It might be so niche that the broader community of the world, for example, doesn't quite understand who and what we are and what it is that we do. So a lot of musicians, a lot of organists have found ways to expand the niche ever so slightly to create a broader audience. Some of these examples include the general music niche with an angle, for example, being a concert pianist with humor or a church organist that travels, and that's sort of like your angle. Debunking the misconceptions of the organ. And if you do that consistently enough, people will know that that's what you're putting out into the world. You could be more specialized. For example, these artists, they primarily do the same kind of content over and over. For Millette Mezzo, she does silly songs in opera style constantly. Groove by Grace does Christian jazz covers. And so they have a pattern that represents their specialized niche. Other styles that you could go into are lifestyle music niche, where you talk about what it is to be a music student in your day-to-day life, or a piano teacher who is also a stay-at-home mom. All of these are ways that you can incorporate your daily life into your online presence. Other options are your instrument accounts, where you focus in on the instrument that you are experiencing or working on. A lot of these things have to do with what you do on a day-to-day basis. And it's important to think about that, because consistent posting and consistent content creating is what makes a cohesive process where people know what to expect. When I was in undergrad, I traveled, I did a semester abroad, and I thought I'm going to be a travel influencer. And I did. I spent that whole summer taking great pictures, and I had a blog. I stayed the semester, and then I got home and didn't travel anymore. I mean, I traveled, but not as regularly as I had been traveling. And so what happened to my content? It basically disappeared. There was just not a way for me to keep up the amount of production for my content as what I needed to be doing for the output. So finding something that doesn't take you out of your routine but enhances your routine can really be helpful in choosing that niche. So keeping that in mind as we're looking ahead, once we've selected our niche, so if, for example, you wanted to do something very specialized, and in my case, I like to do a lot of things that focus on organology and the instruments and how they're designed and built. We then can talk about what it looks like on our account. And I noticed that over time, I was posting in these specific areas. I was posting about organology, but my personal life also kind of was included there. Every time I went to conferences, I was posting, or my stuff as a professor, I was posting about class or assignments that I was doing. And I recognized that there are actually themes that sort of intersperse throughout my platform. And in one of my sessions, I learned more about content pillars. So content pillars are this idea of having a foundational theme of categories that you center your content on. It allows you to have a structure and a consistency to your posts, and it makes it easier to understand what it is that you're about. And when I did a little bit of digging, I found that Instagram actually outlines 3 types of content pillars that are really effective. And that is educate, entertain, and inspire. So, for example, education is about sharing knowledge and about things that you do specifically, sharing information, how to be effective performers, how to provide tips on practice or other exercises. Entertainment is probably the most common type of content, where you're there to provide amusement or a humorous skit, something that is funny and interesting and lighthearted. And then the last one is to inspire. And so we are looking to find ways to spark creativity or action or desire. And those are the ways that people feel most engaged in these 3 pillars. But those are really ways that we can use as sort of a foundation for finding what else we can do. And so examples of ways that we can build on these content pillars is by thinking about, what can I specifically share about education? You might be like, I can share quick fixes for tuning, or if there's a cipher, here's how one way that you can fix it. Entertainment, that's really easy to follow along trends and with fun pranks or other things that are happening in the Instagram world at large. You can also find ways to inspire colleagues, either by discussing your own challenges, finding ways to encourage them to face their fears. And from these content pillars, you can expand. And we see a lot of people who do like daily life, get ready with me, practice schedule, those kinds of contents. And so over time, you recognize that these content pillars kind of give you the opportunity to have a structure to your content. But then what happens after you decide that you're going to do a content post about education or entertainment? And that's the next step. It's brainstorming content. So these are a couple of suggestions for how to think up of content to put out there. And the first one is answerthepublic.com. This is a website where you can go and say, what are people saying about the pipe organ? And it'll actually share things that people are asking on public forums like Reddit. And they'll say, these are questions that people are asking that you can answer. You can follow relevant accounts and see what it is that they're doing and not steal, but maybe model your own content based on what you're seeing others do. Brainstorming sessions, sitting down at the beginning of the month and thinking, what are the holidays or what are the important parts of this month that I can use in highlighting my own content? Creating and keeping a content idea list is really helpful too. Having a notes app, that you just have a consistent list going whenever an idea pops into your head. That's another way to keep the ball rolling on content you want to create. If you're having trouble though, another thing you can do is ask ChatGPT for guidance. If you use this prompt, write a list of content pillars and for my case, a female Instagram creator in the pipe organ music niche. Then based on those pillars, they write a list of 15 hooks to use in the reels that include numbers or trigger words. And when I use this prompt in ChatGPT, this is the list that I got. And you can see here that there are a lot of great suggestions. For example, why did this female composer's music disappear for 200 years? Or did you know this one underrated female composer changed organ music forever? And this is a great way to get ideas about what you want to share, because these are all in line with who I am as a female musicologist studying the organ. So thanks to ChatGPT for that. But then at the end of it all, these are the goals that we have as we create a place for our own identity online. We want to define our purpose and set specific objectives. We want to create an aesthetic, a visual aesthetic, a brand mood board of what we want others to see in ourselves online. And then if you want to go even deeper and talk about specific content, you can look at creating a niche and using content pillars and content brainstorming to create an overarching plan for how you present yourself online. Thank you. If you have any questions, now is the time, I think, for questions.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Lindsay. That was great. I loved
Thanks.
especially the integration of how AI can be really kind of assistant in coming up with these prompts. So it's not just so much on you.
Exactly.
In that process, do you still find it like, I guess what I'm asking is, do you just take what's given to you and then just use that? Or do you have any personal input in it from that point?
No, there's definitely a lot of personal input, especially based on the instrument that you have at hand. Every instrument is going to be different. So a lot of what I get out of ChatGPT then has to be modified for the space that I'm in, the music that I'm working on, or other times it actually leads me to do a little bit of more digging and research, like, oh, what composer did change the world of organ? And that really is an interesting kind of repartee going back and forth with ChatGPT of like, what do I change and what has inspired me to look deeper? So, yeah.
Awesome. All right, so I see some questions here. So the first comes from Tracy. How much time or percentage do you think is a great balance to spend on online promotion? And she goes further to say that she has realized that after you have just talked about this, that even though we spend lots of time in the practice room, that we also need to spend time promoting ourselves.
Absolutely. Nowadays, self-promotion online is inevitable, and it's really what makes you stand out against other musicians and scholars. My suggestion would be to spend probably 20% of your time doing this if you're a student. It's really tough to balance being in school and trying to make a consistent flow of posting. One of the suggestions that was given to me was to plan to post 3 times a week, which sounds quite heavy, right? When we only have 7 days, right? If you post Monday, Wednesday, Friday, in total, that's only 12 posts a month. And if you cut that down even further, if you make only 6 of those reels where you have to create video footage and then edit it, 6 of those can be those video footage formats, but then 6 of those could be still images about what book you're reading right now or what piece you just, started practicing. So really, truly, you're coming down to like 6 things a month that are going to take up a lot of time. And when you kind of plan in advance, batch your content early on, it makes it a lot easier to stay on top of it as you go.
Great. We have another question from Nicholas and Katrina Duo. How do you choose a color palette?
Yeah, so this has to do a little bit with personal preference and kind of what you've already put out into the world. So I like to use pictures and collect a couple of pictures and see what colors jump out. What are things that you like? What's your favorite outfit to wear when you perform? If it's something like in electric blue, that's a great color to use, you know? If you're a standard black and white concert performer, that's great too, you know? You can find a way to add an accent color to that color scheme. And in that case, personal preference. Do you have a favorite color? Is there a color that you see, like if you're working on a specific instrument, sometimes they have like a little detail of blue or red or some sort of like accent. And so finding ways to connect with either the visual that you're going to be working with or with yourself, that's a really great way to start looking for a color palette.
Great. Thanks for that assistance there. We have another question from the duo is, do you think that it's necessary to create separate social media accounts for professional versus personal?
For me, I have separate social media accounts for everything. I have so many, it's ridiculous. Don't have as many as I do. Um, but what I found was that I wanted to create distance so that my friends and family who really did not sign on to be bombarded with my organ content didn't have to be exposed to it. You know, if they chose to follow it after I started promoting myself in my professional account, that was their choice. But it's sort of like hijacking followers if you've already got an account that has your family and friends and grandma and grandpa. I don't know. It just for me, I wanted to create a little bit of distance. And start fresh, get a new idea out there.
Great. I have a follow-up question too. So I know that we're talking a lot about organ-specific materials and things that relate to that. Do you think that when you're kind of planning these things out, how do you deal with if your organ schedule is kind of messed up? If all of a sudden, you have this type of event going on, how do you kind of plan around that?
Sure, that's a great question because we're so busy. There's all these different kinds of schedules that pop up and maybe change what we were planning on doing. I think that there's always a way to actually create content without having to be at the organ, whether it's doing a narrative about what just happened to you or showing off a piece of music that you have readily accessible, but you're in some like practice room or in an office. Doing a funny skit, those tend to be really off the instrument, right? That tends to be a little bit, you know, talking more about like the experiences of being a student. That's a really common trend right now about like there's this funny one that's going around about music theory being just a theory, you know, that kind of a thing. So I think there are really good ways to find connection points away from the instrument that doesn't interfere with your practice time, especially when you like have to watch how much you're practicing and you can't really share that time with content creating. I find that's a really big issue for students. Um, that also allows you to connect with the broader musical world. I think that a lot of other music students are willing to engage with you know our own accounts, but maybe feel a little bit isolated if we only post about the organ or only post in the same style and way. So finding ways to be a little bit more variable and give variety, I think, is important.
Cool. Another question here from Tracy. How do you deal with negative comments? And have you had one
Yeah,
or
that's a great
multiple?
question. So I have had several on my cat's account, actually a ton. Just because of the amount of following that we have, there are always going to be haters out there, people that tell me that I should get a dog instead of having a cat that goes hiking, that kind of stuff. For a while, so initially I wanted to respond to all of the comments, not worth it. Don't waste your time. Number two, I was like, I'm deleting these because I don't want them to like interfere with my emotional state. Eventually I've settled on just letting them exist there because what happens is I find that a lot of people will want to come to my aid and my rescue. And so they'll comment back to the person who left a negative comment, and then they'll comment back. And it actually is beneficial to you because it's generating engagement. If people are interacting, even if it's negative comments, the algorithm doesn't read negativity. The algorithm just reads that there are comments on this post. Therefore, this post needs to be pushed to the top of everybody's feed. So I just leave them there and just for my sake log off for a little bit and then come back and life is good again, you know? But yeah, finding a way to distance yourself from those comments is important for sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions for right now. So I just want to say thank you for presenting this on behalf of everyone at this conference. And if anybody wants to reach out to Lindsay, we can get your information to her if you have any questions about that. And thank you once again.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so now we come to our networking opportunity. So I'm gonna share a couple things about some upcoming events, and then we will have two breakout rooms that you can join. One will be for icebreakers, and the other one will be some music talk. So you'll have a choice of which one to join. But before we do that, I just want to mention again about some upcoming Agoyo events that you'll see. You have our two conventions that are coming up at Fort Worth and Phoenix, where we'll have a Goyo reception where you can come get free food and you get to network with each other. We have 4 upcoming POEs, one of those being a POE-A, which is for advanced. So if you're a little bit more of an experienced player, those will be coming up this summer. So you can check out the AGO website for that. You can also check out, there's some different, if you are a member of AGO, there's some different discounts that you can get. So definitely check those out because that can save you a little bit of money on things, which I know especially as we're getting started in our careers and we're in school and we're moving around, that can be of a big assistance. And definitely check out some of our competitions and scholarships that we have. We have ones that are specifically aimed at young organists and some general ones. Any of those are you're free to, if you can do any of the qualifications that are on it, you're good to go for it. So always check those out. Make sure you're applying to those. I'm going to now, we're going to have a little bit of a raffle for anybody who's registered for this conference. We're going to offer a free year of membership for you. So I am going to share my screen here with you all so we can see our raffle. Here we are. So this just has everybody who's in the conference. So we're going to spin this and see who gets a free year of membership. And it'll be Jacob Miller. So Jacob Miller will win our free year of membership. So he'll be contacted and get that. If you aren't a member, highly encourage you to become one. There's lots of great benefits that come with that, lots of opportunities to network, also to be a part of different committees like the Agoyo committee. And now we're going to separate now into our 2 breakout rooms. So feel free to join either or bounce between each. Those will be open for about 20 minutes here, and then we'll wrap up our conference.